There are moments when the world seems thinner, when the air holds its breath and the ordinary stops feeling safe. In the Celtic imagination, such moments are not coincidences, but invitations, fractures in the veil that keeps two realms apart. Across the mist-laden moors of Scotland, the cold shores of Ireland, and the wind-scoured cliffs of Wales, this boundary has always trembled. It is said that in those fragile spaces, the unseen might step forward, watching quietly from old oaks or the corners of empty fields. And it is through that trembling gate that our journey begins. Welcome to the realm of Celtic mythology, where belief and fear entwine like roots in the same dark soil. Before we continue, take a moment to subscribe to Echoes of the Old World. Here, we walk the paths that once ran between mortals and the divine, retracing footsteps almost erased by time. And if you wish, tell me in the comments from where you are watching this tale unfold. Whether from a quiet countryside or a crowded city, every listener joins the same invisible circle tonight. The old stories thrive only when they are spoken, and by joining us, you become part of their breath. Long before the written word arrived on Celtic shores, humanity explained its fears through creatures and gods who ruled the hidden edges of existence. The Celts saw no rigid barrier between flesh and spirit. Instead, they inhabited a world thick with presence, every mountain, river, and storm alive with intelligence. Myths were not told to entertain, but to survive, to map a moral and physical landscape too perilous to traverse alone. Even now, when has paved the way for logic? These legends whisper behind our senses, hinting that perhaps reason was never meant to silence wonder. To understand Celtic mythology is to enter a web of beliefs stretching across centuries and languages. Irish, Scottish, Gaelic, Welsh, Cornish, Breton. Each thread vibrates with its own flavour, some shimmering with gentleness, others steeped in terror, but together they form a single living organism. The gods and spirits of these lands were not distant. They were kin, sometimes protectors, often capricious, always near. They governed fate as much as weather, demanding reverence not only in temples but in every crossing of a river, every spark from the hearth. You stand at a threshold made not of stone, but of air, sound, and superstition. Here, nightly prayers were whispered not only to saints, but also to invisible courts of fairies, the Aos Sí, dwelling beneath green mounds and beneath still lakes. Travellers carried iron charms, mothers left offerings of milk on windowsills, and fishermen hummed hymns to unknown powers before venturing at dawn. These daily rituals were not empty gestures. They were currencies of respect, exchanged for safety in a world that never forgot its unseen inhabitants. But to grasp the Celtic imagination, one must first sense its geography, a land carved by wind, rain, and longing. Imagine dark forests dripping with moss, where the air smells of peat, fires, and sea salt. The terrain itself feels enchanted, its ruggedness forming the personality of the beings said to dwell within it. The borderlands of Ireland's bogs and the heathered slopes of Scotland are not backdrops, but characters. Silent, vast, watchful. In such places, storytelling became survival, a way of naming the forces that might otherwise consume you unacknowledged. And so the tales grew. From village firesides to monastic manuscripts, voices passed the memories of gods turned into kings, of spirits both protective and wrathful. The Dullahan, who rides without a head, was no Gothic invention, but a reminder that death does not knock. It arrives with certainty and speed. The Banshee's cry was not simply horror, it was communication from the other realm, an omen clothed in compassion and terror alike. Over generations, fear and faith merged until no soul could separate them. The Celts believed that time was circular, not linear. the seasons rose and fell like breathing, and with each turn came ceremonies that opened doors between the living and the dead. Samhain, marking the birth of winter, was one such night when spirits walked freely, seeking warmth or vengeance. The living lit bonfires and wore disguises, hoping to hide from the eyes of wandering ancestors. The practice survives now as Halloween, its playful masks barely concealing the solemnity of what once was a pact between humanity and the unseen. The genius of Celtic storytelling lies in its refusal to moralize. Here, monsters are not always evil, and beauty rarely means safety. The Cailleach, for instance, the old woman of winter, created mountains with her hammer, but also buried life beneath snow. The fairies were capable of generosity and cruelty in equal measure, rewarding courtesy but punishing arrogance with merciless precision. Every creature existed not to instruct, but to warn, to represent the eternal duality between creation and destruction woven into itself. As civilizations changed, the myths adapted. When Christianity spread through Ireland and Scotland, it did not erase the old beliefs, but absorbed them, softening edges without breaking the spell. Saints replaced gods but often kept their habits. Wells, once sacred to Bridget, remained places of pilgrimage, now under her new, saintly name. This syncretism preserved the faith that divinity dwelled nearby, in springs, in storms, in the human voice raised in prayer or curse alike. Imagine standing on a cliff at dusk, the sea roaring below, the wind twisting through the grass. In the fading light, the horizon quivers like a living thing. For the Celts, this shimmer was truth, not illusion. Their worldview had no firm line between the tangible and the ethereal. Every field and glen concealed a story, and every story was alive. When they spoke of spirits, they did not speak metaphorically. They described neighbors whom one could offend or befriend, banish or unknowingly summon. Each region contributed its unique pantheon. The Irish mythos teems with the Tuatha Dé Danann, gods of art, war and magic who became the hidden fair folk after their defeat. Scotland gave us the Nuckelavee and Eachwishjay, horrors born of saltwater and stormlight. Wales whispered of heroic transformations, men turning into animals under the relentless will of enchantment. Brittany, with its haunting coastline, nurtured myths of phantom ships and spectral tears. Together, they formed a chorus of belief that blurred across tribal borders, echoing through time. These stories were not static legends. They evolved with the people. The fairy mounds might once have symbolized burial sites, later seen as gateways to paradise below the earth. A creature's tale changed each time it was told, shaped by hunger, epidemic, or love. What began as religious devotion turned into folklore, but never lost its authority over emotion. Even now, locals leave coins at ancient wells or whisper to lonely standing stones. These actions may seem quaint, yet they connect the present to an unbroken chain of awe. In Celtic lands, beauty and terror dance together, inseparable. A lake's mirror-like surface suggests reflection, but in those dark depths, waiting eyes gleam. A gentle breeze may be a spirit's sigh. It is this uncertainty that makes the mythology so intoxicating. Nothing is ever fully explained, and explanations are never enough. The myths ask not for belief, but for attention, for the humility to admit how easily the ordinary can transform beneath moonlight or grief. Within the cycle of creation and decay, the Celts found meaning. Their deities and monsters embodied natural forces, the fury of storms, the fertility of soil, the frailty of mortality itself. To honor them was to acknowledge that humankind stands not above the world, but within it. The Dullahan's approach, the Banshee's lament, the Cailleach's frost, each served as a reminder that death and rebirth are partners, not enemies. The myths educated without instruction, teaching through the pulse of fear and reverence. The otherworld, or Tir na Nog, was not a place of punishment nor reward. It was parallel to the mortal realm, brighter and achingly beautiful, yet perilous for those who lingered too long. Time flowed differently there. A single night could stretch into centuries. Souls might wander between, both, bringing wisdom or ruin. To the Celtic mind, the afterlife was not remote. It was simply the world's hidden layer, shimmering under the same sun. Even today, echoes of this worldview linger. Songs of lost Selkies, farmers' blessings over the first furrow, and festivals marking solstices and harvests carry whispers of the same old pacts. Folklore societies in Ireland and Wales still collect testimonies from elders who claim encounters with the good people. Whether one believes or not, such testimonies prove that myth remains the language through which humans explain what reason cannot touch. For those who join us on this voyage, understand that what follows is not a list of phantoms, but a map of human consciousness carved into story. Each creature, whether a whispering banshee or a glistening selkie, is a reflection of necessity. Fear keeps us cautious. Wonder keeps us alive. The Celts built their mythology not to escape reality, but to inhabit it more deeply, to name every silence between heartbeat and shadow. So, as our journey begins, tread carefully. The creatures we will meet are ancient, but they still hunger for acknowledgement. They dwell not only in ruined stones or sea caves, but in language, in memory, in the pauses between stories. Listen closely to the wind outside your window tonight, Vesaras. Perhaps it carries a name older than time itself. Step with respect, for to know these beings is to walk the old path between worlds, a path that still leads somewhere, if only you dare to listen. And if this world between worlds moves you, remain with us in echoes of the old world, where every forgotten tale finds its voice again. Among all the beings of Celtic legend, few inspire such dread as the Dullahan, the headless rider whose arrival heralds the end of life itself. He rides beneath moonlight, silent except for the clatter of hooves upon distant stone. To hear that rhythm in the depth of night was never a coincidence. It was an omen, a whisper from the boundary that separates this world from whatever lies beyond. The Dullahan is not merely a ghost or demon, but the embodiment of mortality, personal, deliberate, and unstoppable. He is death made animate, a messenger whose work no prayer can deter. Those who have seen him tell the same story across generations. A dark horse, muscles slick with otherworldly sheen, dragging behind it a carriage made of bone and leather stretched from the condemned. Upon it sits the rider, holding his own head aloft by the hair like a lantern. The skin of that head is said to be the colour of decayed cheese, its mouth twisted into a smile, too wide, too human, and too final. The eyes, forever open, glow faintly in the darkness, scanning for the one whose time has come. There are no accidents in his gaze. To meet those eyes is to feel a cold certainty, as though the air itself ceases to move. In old Irish belief, the Dullahan was known to call the name of his chosen victim before collecting their soul. No wall, no gate, no lock could keep him out. Such defences belong to the living, and he rode for the dead. He carries a whip fashioned from a human spine, not to wound, but to command obedience. Even the bravest stallion breaks beneath that sound. Where he passes, doors bar themselves, torches flicker out, and the night seems to lean forward, listening. The only defense against him, according to legend, was a token of pure metal, iron or gold, held tightly until his shadow had gone. In that small glimmer of human craft lay mankind's one fragile protection against oblivion. The Dullahan's origins rest deep within Ireland's mythic soil. Scholars trace him to the ancient god Crom Dubh, who demanded human sacrifices each harvest season. When worship of such deities was outlawed, their stories transformed, but their essence endured. The Dullahan became a remnant of that cycle of offering, the personification of what every tribe once feared yet accepted, the necessity of death. His endless ride is not cruelty, it is the continuation of an older covenant between flesh and decay. Where the god once claimed his due in ritual, now the rider collects it invisibly, without altar or prayer. To imagine the Dullahan is to confront the solemn poetry of the Celtic mind. Death was never viewed as evil in itself, only inevitable and sacred. The Dullahan follows rules older than morality. He doesn't taunt or punish. He arrives when balance demands it, and that inevitability made him all the more terrifying. The Celts feared him, but also respected the function he served, to remind every soul that life is lent, not owned. To see him is to remember that the line between breathing and silence is thinner than sound. Yet the Dullahan is not alone in his dreadful service. Across Ireland and Scotland, other messengers walk in mourning. The Banshee, Aos Sí in the old tongue, is perhaps his closest sister in purpose. Where he rides, she weeps. Her cry is a sound that shatters silence, described by those who claim to have heard it as neither scream nor song, but a lament so ancient it could only belong to the earth itself. She is said to appear outside the home of a dying person, washing blood from spectral clothes or combing her hair by the river's edge. The families who hear her keening know at once that loss is near, but her sorrow carries no cruelty. She mourns the passing before the living can comprehend it. Unlike the Dullahan, the Banshee is not a harvester of life, but a herald of its departure. Some say she follows the noble families whose names once ruled Ireland. Others claim she attends anyone whose bloodline traces back to the old tribes. Her presence was at times a comfort, for it meant that death, though painful, came with acknowledgement. The Celts believed that to die forgotten was far worse than to die at all, and in that sense, the Banshee's cry was a blessing, a promise that the dying would not cross alone. Another guardian of the threshold is the mysterious Aos Sí, the phantom hound that prowls the highlands of Scotland. Descriptions vary, but most agree he is the size of a young bull, covered in shaggy green fur, and moving with a silence unnatural for his strength. He hunts not flesh, but souls, and his approach is marked by a ritualistic pattern of 3 barks. Only 3. After the third, the heart of his target ceases, and the spirit is carried away to the other world by unseen winds. Farmers once claimed to hear those distant roars echoing across the moors, freezing them mid-step until dawn's safety returned. Together, the Dullahan, the Banshee, and the Aos Sí represent a triad of Celtic fatalism, each an expression of inevitability rather than evil. Their existence answers an ancient anxiety: how to face the end without denying its power. The Dullahan brings finality, the Banshee compassion, the Aos Sí discipline and pace. Death, as envisioned through them, is not chaos, but choreography, a solemn rite enacted by forces both merciless and just. Through their actions, the Celts found structure in what might otherwise have been senseless loss. An important element of these myths lies in their emotional landscape. The Dullahan does not simply terrify, he embodies awe, a respect that demands stillness, When villagers heard distant hooves on a foggy road, they did not curse. They closed their shutters, extinguished their lights, and waited. That silence was not submission, but reverence, a collective act recognizing that the world operates on laws beyond human appeal. Death itself became a ritual participant in life's pattern. It entered the home not as an intruder, but as an inevitable guest. One can see in these stories the lasting attempt to reconcile human vulnerability with cosmic order. The Celts refused to frame mortality as punishment. Instead, they conceived of it as the final migration, part of an eternal cycle mirrored by the seasons. As the harvest ends and the fields lie fallow, so too must the body return its borrowed elements to the soil. The Dullahan's decaying headlight and the Banshee's tear-streaked eyes are metaphors not for despair, but for continuity. A grim beauty, reminding that nothing truly disappears. It only changes form. Legends also warn what happens when one mocks or disrespects these emissaries. In some villages, people claimed that the Dullahan's whip could strike out an eye of a curious soul, daring to watch his ride in defiance. Others said he would simply stop at the offender's door, lift his head high, and call their name softly into the dark. It was not cruelty, it was justice. Those who broke the contract between respect and arrogance summoned their own doom. Thus, myth served to protect the humility that kept communities spiritually aligned with the land. Even within fear, there existed tenderness. The Banshee's mourning often mirrored real-world grief rituals, where women, traditionally called keeners, sang beside the dying or the dead, their wails believed to ease passage into the next life. The supernatural Banshee may well be a divine echo of those human customs, distilled into spirit through centuries of shared sorrow. The line between folk and faith blurs again. Perhaps she exists because grief itself demanded personification, because sound is memory made living. The Cailleach, relentless yet bound by rules, expresses the Celtic obsession with order inside chaos. His three barks, never more, never less, form a sacred symmetry. Time granted before the third allowed repentance or farewell, suggesting mercy within terror. Every myth within this constellation contains such a device: law within horror, purpose within mystery. These beings are governed not by whim, but by cosmic duty, reflecting a theology where even the darkest act serves creation's balance. Some storytellers believed that the Dullahan's ride was not random, but cyclical, following patterns in seasons or tides of the moon. Others linked his appearances to moments of transformation in the community: the birth of heirs, the fall of leaders, the outbreak of famine. In this reading, he is not a personal tormentor, but the manifestation of collective fate. Communities projected their fears and their understanding of inevitable change onto him, turning mortality into narrative so they could bear its weight. Across generations, the story of the Dullahan reached beyond Celtic borders. Variations of the headless rider appear across Europe, the Hessian horsemen of later tales or spectral hunters of German woodlands, but Ireland guards the oldest form. In the Celtic context, he is not a villain to defeat, but a lesson to learn. His silence teaches reverence, his presence demands humility. Where modern myth often seeks redemption, the Celtic mind sought understanding instead. In accepting the rider, one accepts the structure of life and its end. The power of the Dullahan's legend lies in its lingering presence. Even now, travellers who cross the foggy plains of Connaught after midnight report hearing hooves that echo without origin. Some swear the sound halts beside ancient bridges, where the wind trembles before resuming its path. Whether such tales are born of imagination or something deeper does not matter. The story persists because it speaks to the universal pulse of mortality, the knowledge that life is precious precisely because it ends. So if, one night, you find yourself walking a lonely road and the world grows unnaturally quiet, recall these words. Should a horse's breath steam in the darkness ahead, do not look up. The Dullahan does not harm those who respect the veil, who understand that they are guests in a world larger than sight. Close your eyes and wait until the silence returns to normal, for that courtesy may grant you another dawn. Yet know this, one day, far from now or perhaps sooner than you expect, when the wind itself seems to hold its breath, the hooves will sound again, and somewhere in that stillness, a name will be spoken, a name that belongs to you, whispered with calm inevitability by the one who rides between life and legend. When night stretches long and the horizon folds into ink-black silence, there are winds that do not belong to the weather. They move with a strange hunger, brushing through the heather in patterns no storm could trace. The people of the Scottish Highlands once said that those winds carried the Sluagh, the host of the unforgiven dead. These spirits are not gentle ancestors or wandering shades. They are remnants of souls so corrupted by life that even the otherworld rejected them. They drift in dark flocks across the sky, searching endlessly for what they lost and punishing those fool enough to meet their gaze. The word Sluagh means host or army in the Gaelic tongue, and that is precisely how they travel. Like birds in terrible formation, they streak across the night, their cries resembling both laughter and lament. Some accounts describe them as shadowy forms with tattered wings, others as streaks of sickly green light, like dying stars gliding over the moors. Their sound is said to come just before midnight, a shrill chorus that chills the marrow of any who hear it. The Sluagh do not descend. They swoop, seizing the spirit of a dying person through open windows or chimneys, claiming it as one of their own before it can find peace. For centuries, households in the Hebrides and western coasts kept their west-facing windows shut after dusk. The west was considered the direction of the dead, the path along which spirits traveled to the afterlife. To leave a window ajar invited intrusion. A dying man would be turned eastward, his bed carefully placed so the Sluagh could not take him with their midnight flight. Even in illness or old age, the rules were obeyed without question. In every village, someone knew of a relative or neighbor who ignored the tradition and paid for it with an unnatural silence. The Sluagh stole not only life, but rest itself. These were not simply tales of superstition. They were psychological maps of guilt and redemption. The unforgiven dead represented more than punishment after death. They were symbols of unresolved wrongs, of lives lived out of harmony with community, or to see a host of Sluagh was to witness the consequences of imbalance, a warning that every action echoes beyond its mortal boundary. In this way, the story fulfilled a deeper human craving, the need to believe that no crime or cruelty ever vanishes without answer. The Sluagh are not entirely without rules. Unlike demons of Christian imagination, they do not invade without reason. Their presence must be drawn by decay, moral or physical. A place of cruelty, unburied dead, or unrepented sin invites them more strongly than any spoken summons. Some versions claim they hunt only during the thinning of the veil around Samhain, that night when October concedes to November and the frontier between worlds grows frail. Others insist they circle ceaselessly, gathering strength from storms and shadows, following the scent of dying breath across plains and rivers. Many stories speak of people who glimpsed the slough and lived to tell it. A traveller, they say, once slept by Loch Hour and awoke to a rushing wind above his camp. The air turned metallic, humming with voices that did not use words. When he looked up, he saw a procession of dark figures sweeping the clouds, one of them slowing as if to watch him. The traveller turned his face to the soil and did not move until dawn. By morning, his hair had turned white, and though he would say nothing, he spent the rest of his life avoiding the west wind. It was said that a single glance from the sluagh marks the soul, a promise silently kept for the final breath. The Irish tales paint them somewhat differently, though the essence remains. In Ireland, they were seen as fragments of lost warriors, cursed to never know rest because their victories were soaked in blood spilled unjustly. They were feared yet respected, a reflection of how violence and honour intertwined in Celtic thought. Death itself could not absolve wrongdoing, but awareness and ritual might lessen its weight. Funerary customs evolved around that belief. Fires burned bright along roadsides to keep spirits from straying, and crosses of rushes were woven to protect both living and dead from corruption. Every flicker of a flame was both prayer and signal. You are seen, you are forgiven, do not return. The theology behind the sluagh intertwines with the broader Celtic understanding of the afterlife. Unlike other cultures that divided heaven and hell, the Celts imagined a more fluid geography of souls, where morality was less judgment and more alignment. A life lived in selfishness pulled one away from equilibrium, transforming the spirit into something dissonant. The sluagh are the pure manifestation of that dissonance. Souls so frayed they no longer recognize light. They exist not to torment others, but because they cannot stop moving. There is no rest where harmony never was. Their depiction has evolved across centuries. In Christian retellings, they resemble fallen angels or demons in service of damnation, while modern folklorists interpret them as echoes of the ancient wild hunt, the spectral chase led by gods or kings of old. Yet the Celtic version remains distinct in its melancholy. The sluagh do not chase prey for pleasure, but for release. Every captured soul temporarily softens their torment, a fleeting reunion with what they once were. When dawn comes and they vanish into mist, the stolen spirits are scattered across the sea, their voices blending with the wind that moves forever westward. There are clues that the myth served ritual and environmental purposes as well. Communities near rough coastlines often associated the sluagh with sudden squalls or whirlwinds that threatened fishermen. To appease them, food and drink were left on the shore before major voyages. These offerings may have been gifts to the sea gods originally, but over time they became acts meant to pacify the restless host. The blending of pragmatism and faith reflects the unique genius of Celtic belief. Religion and survival intertwined seamlessly, one feeding the other. In storytelling, the sluagh became mirrors for communal mistakes. A famine, a war, an epidemic. Each disaster found its justification in moral failing. When the dead refused peace, it signified that the living had betrayed old laws, hospitality ignored, oaths broken, greed left unchecked. By giving shape to consequence, the myth transformed fear into guidance. Children were taught that cruelty might not end at the grave, and even kings learned humility when storms tore across their fields. Through terror, wisdom was sown. But the legend also carries unexpected compassion. The sluagh are condemned, yet some tales suggest they crave redemption. On certain nights, their flight softens, their cries resembling prayers more than threats. In those rare moments, the wind hushes, and the world feels delicate, as if on the verge of forgiving itself. To witness this, elders said, was a blessing meant for those who had suffered loss, but kept faith. If the unforgiven dead could repent through endurance, perhaps the living too could find peace through remembrance. Artists and poets across Ireland and Scotland later reimagined the slúth as symbols of grief itself, the unseen force that surrounds mourning hearts, tangible yet untouchable. Their ceaseless motion echoes the restless mind that cannot let go of the dead. In this sense, the myth serves both cultural discipline and emotional truth. It explains how sorrow, when suppressed, becomes haunting. The slúth, ever circling the skies, are those emotions unspoken, seeking expression before they rot the soul. Each element of their myth intertwines with environmental imagery. The western winds that carry them symbolize both decay and renewal. The hills they sweep over are not condemned but sanctified, reminders that itself stores memory. A storm rolling over the Hebrides might once have been heard as warning. Now it remains, unintentionally, a song of persistence. The spirits have not vanished any more than their meaning has. They have turned into weather, the eternal testimony of wrongs remembered and forgiven only through retelling. If you listen carefully during a storm in the Highlands, you might still hear something beneath the wind's scream. A layered sound, mournful, yet oddly rhythmic. The locals do not speak of it aloud, but they close their shutters just the same, honoring an agreement older than written language. They know what rides that wind, the congregation of those who never learn to rest. Each gust is a whisper from the slúth, reminding all who hear that the border between the living and the dead depends less on death than on memory. For those walking ancient paths along the Scottish cliffs, there comes an instinctive unease when twilight turns sudden and cold. The birds vanish, the sea pauses, and a pressure builds in the air like unshed rain. Then it comes. The winds rise, the shimmer across the horizon, the sensation that eyes without form are watching from above. That is the hour of the slúth, the period when remorse takes shape, and the past briefly claims dominion over the present. Walk swiftly, keep your thoughts clean, and never look west. Yet even fear can hold gratitude. The slúth, terrifying as they are, preserve the moral architecture of the world. They remind us that forgiveness is neither automatic nor shallow. It must be earned through the living acknowledgement of wrong. And though centuries have dimmed belief in their flight, their essence survives in the stories people still tell when wind rattles the windows and elders murmur of souls that never slept. To speak of them keeps them contained. To forget them would invite their return. So, as the fire dims and the wind sharpens, you might sense the faintest whisper passing above. An old lament carried by unseen wings. Do not respond, do not search the sky. Simply close your window, whisper a blessing, and let the darkness pass you by. For tonight, perhaps the host hunts elsewhere. But remember, every storm carries memory, and the air itself has eyes. There is a season when the land grows silent, when ice threads its fingers through every valley and the world holds its breath. That is when she wakes, the Cailleach, ancient mother, stormbringer, and shaper of the Highlands. The stories name her with reverence and fear in equal measure, for she is the oldest of the old, a goddess so ancient that even gods bow to her memory. Where she walks, rivers freeze, mountains rise, and the light of day shudders into retreat. To the Celts, she was not a villain but a force, carved from the same primal stone as the earth itself. Her name means the Veiled One in Gaelic, and indeed, she hides many faces. Some tell of an old crone draped in blue-grey robes, her hair white as frost, and her eyes as sharp as the north wind. Others say she is vast as the hills, her skin the colour of granite, her breath forming snowstorms across the land. She carries a hammer forged before history began, a tool that can raise mountains or shatter them into dust. When winter spreads its cold dominion, it is said the Cailleach strides across the world, striking the earth to still its pulse and drive the heat of life below. In Old Scotland, the Cailleach was believed to create the landscape itself. Each ridge, loch, and glen bore her imprint. Some mountains were said to be ancient stones she dropped from her apron as she wandered the land. The deepest valleys were the footprints left where she paused to rest. Her most famous home was Ben Nevis, the tallest mountain in Scotland, often described as her throne. From there she commands the weather, calling blizzards, shaping the fog that clings to the moors, and whispering to winds that scour the heather bare. The Cailleach is not merely a goddess of cold, but of transformation. Every snowfall, every freeze, every howl of winter wind marks the renewal of balance. She is the necessary opposite of Brigid, the goddess of spring and fertility. Together, they form a divine cycle. One brings life, the other resets it. Some legends claim they are the same being, shifting from maiden to crone and back again with the turning of the seasons. When Brigid reigns, fields awaken. When the Cailleach returns, all things sleep. It is not war, but rhythm, an eternal exhalation and inhalation of creation. In Ireland, rural folklore spoke of her awakening at Samhain, when the veil between worlds thins and the first frost descends. From that moment until the Feast of Beltane in early May, she holds dominion. Farmers watch the signs carefully. The first heavy snow was her cloak spreading across the mountains, and the last white patch fading from the slopes meant she had turned to stone again, giving back the world to warmth. The year itself was divided according to her moods, a living calendar wrapped in mythic breath. But beneath the reverence lay caution. The Cailleach was unpredictable, quick to anger, and merciless toward those who disrespected her realm. Travellers caught in sudden storms were said to have awakened her wrath. Shepherds left offerings of milk or bread on stones at high pastures to appease her before winter grazing. In some regions, if a late snow crushed the lambing season, people whispered that someone had neglected to honour the Cailleach properly. Her justice was fierce, but never arbitrary. She responded only to imbalance, to vanity, greed, or disregard for his rhythm. Many ancient stories describe her work at the dawn of time. The Highlands, they say, were once formless until she came with her hammer of frost. Striking the ground again and again, she sculpted mountains and carved valleys, filling them with tears that became lochs. When she grew tired, she sought rest in caves, curling into stone. Some tales speak of her herd of deer, wild and free, roaming as her messengers. In this image, she becomes both guardian and hunter, life-giver and destroyer, a shape beyond good or evil. To the Celts, such duality was perfection. Nothing pure can endure without its shadow. There are tales of her lovers too, though none long survived her embrace. One myth tells of the summer god, Angus Og, radiant and young, who trapped her in sleep to bring spring early. Yet even he could not completely escape her reach. Each year, her cold returns to reclaim what warmth builds. Another story speaks of her creation of the sun itself, a child she releases reluctantly, day by day, until she must chase it down again. Beneath each telling lies a cosmic truth, that all growth depends upon decay, and that every dawn carries the memory of its night. In folk belief, the Cailleach's power was not confined to myth. In certain Scottish villages, women would toss a log or branch into the hearth on the final night of winter, naming it the Cailleach's staff. When it burned to ash, spring was allowed to begin. Others built doll figures of straw and old cloth, representing her, and cast them into rivers to carry winter away. In some cases, one unlucky person was appointed the Cailleach of the year, the last to finish threshing grain. Mocked, but honoured for bearing her weight, until new life stirred again. Through these rituals, the people symbolically negotiated with the cosmic balance she represented. The Cailleach also carries the memory of the divine feminine before religion divided the world into higher and lower powers. She is the earth as mother and judge, scientist and poet. Unlike later patriarchal depictions of hags as purely wicked, her image commanded awe rather than disgust. To fear her was to understand her necessity. Life could only flourish through her temporary dominion. In this way, the Celts conceived of the universe not as moral hierarchy, but as conversation, a dialogue between fire and frost, seed and stone. One haunting aspect of her myth is her loneliness. Though she spans centuries, the Cailleach stands largely apart. Her immortality isolates her, forcing her to witness the rise and fall of mortal creatures who forget her name even as they live upon the world she built. Each winter could be read as her sorrow, the earth's mourning shroud laid until memory returns. Yet, paradoxically, this solitude makes her benevolent in her own severe way. She destroys not out of malice but out of aching necessity. Through her stillness, spring gathers the strength to rise again. In the Hebrides, sailors once appeased her with ritual offerings thrown into the sea before storms. They called her the woman of the waves, mother of the tides, ruler of the unseen depths. Some said her great blue cloak was the ocean itself, shifting between calm and fury as her mood darkened. When storms shattered coasts or swallowed ships, whispers spread that she had passed overhead, seeking tribute from those who had not remembered her. In this maritime form, she fuses with the sea goddesses of older creed, merging land and water into one consciousness of power. Through the centuries, the Cailleach's image subtly changed. Early legends invoked her as creator. Later, Christianized versions reduced her to a malevolent witch. Yet even in these reimagined tales, her power resisted confinement. The same people who spoke of saints still left gifts on her sacred peaks, unable to erase their awe. Folklore survives, not because it resists change, but because it absorbs it, keeping truth alive beneath adaptation. The Cailleach remains a goddess disguised as weather, hidden in the chill that travels through bone to remind humanity of its smallness. Her story illustrates a vital truth about Celtic belief, that destruction and preservation coexist as partners. Modern mythologies prefer clear heroes and villains, but the old world recognized complexity as divine. The Cailleach does not destroy without purpose. She prunes, preparing the ground for renewal. Beneath her silence grow the roots of spring, and within her storms lie the clarity that follows them. By embodying both death and rebirth, she turns fear into faith, winter into promise. When you stand among the highlands as snowflakes drift in slow descent, think of her presence moving invisibly through the mist. The peaks around you might once have been the folds of her robe, the streams, the glint of her tears. Feel the weight of her hammer in the air, the pulse that freezes and frees at once. In her realm, time slows to a meditation, inviting you to see how endings are simply beginnings rearranged. The Cailleach teaches not despair, but endurance, a lesson carved into stone by every frost. And so, when the cold returns and silence thickens over the land, do not curse it. It is her breath you feel on your skin, her song buried beneath the howling wind. She does not come to punish, but to remind. Rest is sacred. Endings are fertile. Stillness is alive. For the Cailleach, the Queen of Winter, remains the primordial rhythm of itself, older than gods, older than time. The great sculptor whose every gesture turns death into beauty and silence into song. Far to the north, where the sea meets the cliffs in endless conversation, there exists a world that shifts between wave and air, Here, the line between the ocean and the shore is not a barrier, but a doorway, and from that threshold rise the Selkies and the Merrows, the shapeshifters of Celtic waters. They are creatures of absolute duality, both human and seal, both spirit and flesh, both love and loss in the same movement of tide. To those who lived by the coast, their presence explained the sea's caprice, its generosity and its wrath, its beauty and its cruelty. To love the waves was to risk being loved by what hid beneath them. Selkies are said to be seals who can shed their skins beneath the moon, revealing human forms of haunting beauty. In these tales, beauty is never safety. When a Selkie steps ashore, she hides her glistening pelt close by, for without it, she is trapped upon land, vulnerable to mortals who covet what should never belong to them. Many stories begin when a fisherman or lonely man discovers one such skin left carelessly upon a rock. He hides it, and with it, he steals the creature's freedom. The Selkie, unable to return to her home beneath the waves, weeps but submits, living among humans as wife and mother until the day she discovers where her stolen skin lies. Then, with neither goodbye nor regret, she returns to the sea. Her departure leaves only salt and silence in the house she once graced. This pattern repeats across countless versions from Orkney, Shetland, and the coasts of Ireland. The moral remains unchanged. No union between sea and land can endure. The Selkie's love is deep but fragile, destined to shatter because it defies the balance demands. To take her skin is to impose possession on what must remain free. Yet, for all their sorrow, these stories bring tenderness. They speak not of punishment, but of understanding, an acknowledgement that love itself is strongest when it refuses to own. In this, the myth becomes a meditation on the impermanence of desire and the inevitability of return. In other forms of the tale, male Selkies rise from the waves on stormy nights, drawn to women unsatisfied with their mortal partners, handsome beyond human measure, their dark hair wet with brine. They offer passion like a temporarily borrowed dream. Some call them kind, others call them enchantment made flesh. The women who follow them into the sea are said to vanish without suffering, smiling as they dissolve beneath the surf. Their fate remains unknown, but never described as tragic. To leave with a Selkie is to exchange the heaviness of life for the eternal drift of the otherworld's sea. Closely related, yet with their own distinct mythology, are the Merrows, the merfolk of Irish and Scottish tradition. Unlike the Selkies, who shift from seal to human and back, the Merrows dwell permanently beneath the surface. Female Merrows are often described as graceful beings with emerald hair, skin soft and pale as foam, and long webs between their fingers. They wear a red cap called a Cohulian druith, which allows them to dive and rise between realms. Should a human steal this cap, the Merrow is bound to remain on land, echoing the captivity of the Selkie. But their disposition differs. Merrows are known to be more melancholic than vengeful, creatures of longing caught between curiosity and nostalgia for the deep. Male Merrows, by contrast, are rarely objects of fascination. Deformed and monstrous, with green teeth and wrinkled faces like drowned corpses, they embody the brutal side of the sea that humans prefer to forget. The difference between the genders mirrors humanity's own reflection, the sea, as mirror of desire and fear alike. While the female Merrow's beauty draws us inward, the male reflects what lies behind that fascination: the abyss, the infinite, the unknowable depth that can love and kill in the same gesture. The Irish believed Merrows once served as messengers between mortals and the dead. The ocean, after all, was both grave and cradle. Their songs carried prayers from the drowned to the living and from the living to the drowned. Fishermen claimed to hear them singing just before storms, voices neither warning nor malicious, but filled with unbearable sadness. Some said the sound caused the bravest sailors to weep without knowing why. Those tears were seen as offerings, the only human tribute accepted by the deep. In their music lies the essence of the Celtic sea myth: emotion as enchantment, sorrow as sacred language. Among older Gaelic communities, the Merrow's realm was not hell nor heaven, but a reflection of earth inverted, a luminous, underwater country where time stilled and memory never faded. Those who returned from encounters with the Merrows spoke of crystal towers, fields of kelp glowing like emerald light, and dances performed in silence, where movement itself was the rhythm. They described the sensation of being loved by the sea, an embrace both tender and suffocating. When they woke on the shore, days or decades had passed, depending on whose measure one used. Thus, the Merrow's kiss became a metaphor for timelessness, the impossible dream of returning home and never leaving again. The relationship between humans and these sea beings emerged from practical coexistence. Coastal life was harsh, unpredictable, and bound to the rhythms of the tide. The sea provided sustenance, yet claimed lives without warning. To make sense of such ambivalence, the mind transformed the ocean into personality. When the catch was good, the Selkies were said to be smiling upon their cousins above water. When storms took men without mercy, people whispered that the Merrows had called them home. Through these narratives, grief found voice and chaos found order. Myth was not escape, it was translation. Interestingly, both creatures embody transformation rather than destruction. They do not seek to drown humanity, they simply reclaim what has strayed too far from balance. The Selkies' return to the sea is not vengeance upon her husband, but the righting of an imbalance. The Merrow's call to the drowned is not cruelty, but fulfillment of a pact. The sea gives life through fish and takes it back through tide. The Celts did not recognize the ocean as evil. They saw it as older than judgment, a god too vast for morality to contain. In this way, these myths serve as gentle warnings wrapped in elegy. Over time, Christianity reinterpreted the Selkie and Merrow within moral frameworks. The stolen skin became a symbol of temptation. The forbidden union stood as caution against desire outside divine limits. Yet even then, the softness of the older tales endured. The monks who recorded these legends often could not remove their melancholy beauty. In many manuscripts, the Selkies' departure is described almost as redemption, her return to purity rather than sin. The faith of the land adapted to the faith of the church, folding pagan awe into sacred metaphor. Modern retellings sometimes portray the Selkie as feminist icon, an image of freedom reclaimed, a woman who escapes captivity and reclaims autonomy. While this interpretation suits contemporary understanding, the older wisdom still whispers beneath it. Liberation carries pain. Every shedding of skin demands sacrifice. Every return home leaves someone drowning on the shore of memory. The myth remains powerful because it refuses simple triumph. It acknowledges that joy and sorrow share a single tide. Culturally, these legends serve to explain emotional truths that logic could not satisfy. Every coastal community knew the experience of waiting for someone who never returned from sea. The Selkie became the dream that the missing loved one had not died, but found another world to live within. The Merrow became the mind's comfort for hearing voices in the wind. Even their romantic aspects, marriages between human and sea being, echo the real relationships between families and the ocean that fed them. Love, danger, and loss were the three faces of the same coin tossed eternally into the surf. Few myths are so intertwined with the natural senses as these. Every detail carries tactile resonance: the slick touch of a seal's skin, the salt sting of mist, the weight of silence broken only by gulls. To tell a story of Selkies or Merrows is to smell seaweed and cold stone, to hear the lap of waves and heartbeats out of sync. This sensory richness made the myths durable. They were not distant fables, but lived sensations, reminders that even in ordinary life, the unseen brushed close whenever water darkened under moonlight. So, when you stand by the coast at twilight and the sea seems to breathe, consider what gazes back from the waves. Perhaps it is memory, or perhaps it is a veil-lifted shape searching for something it left behind on land. If you see a seal watching you from the surf, offer a silent greeting and nothing more. Do not follow the music if you hear singing, for melody in the night tide belongs to another realm. The ocean loves generously but never safely, and its affection is deeper than any human heart can bear. In every legend of Selkies and Merrows lives that truth, that to love the sea is to accept both wonder and departure, always intertwined like foam and stone. In the stillness of twilight, when rivers turn to mirrors and locks stretch into silent glass, the shape of a horse may appear by the water's edge. Its coat glistens black as oil, its mane dripping with silver threads of algae. The creature stands perfectly still, patient and inviting, waiting for the careless traveler who sees only beauty and not the snare beneath. This is the Kelpie, the waterhorse of Scottish legend, born from the places where reflection and reality confuse each other. To meet its gaze is to feel the river draw closer, whispering promises in the language of drowning. The Kelpie is among the most enduring of all Celtic myths, its story echoing through the highlands and lowlands alike. Every lake seems to have one, every stream its rumour. They are shapeshifters, capable of taking human form, yet they always betray themselves through small details. A mane that drips perpetually with water, or eyes too deep and glossy to belong to anyone mortal. More than spirits of death, they are embodiments of the untamed element itself. As alluring as danger can be, and as cruel as must, their forms seduce, but their purpose remains constant: to lure, consume, and reclaim the foolhardy who forget the respect owed to the dark waters. Unlike tales of fairies or ghosts, the Kelpie's terror is practical. To live near the lochs and rivers of Scotland was to live beside constant peril. The water could give life, feeding livestock, powering mills, but it could just as easily take it without remorse. The Kelpie explained the inexplicable disappearances. The fisher never returned, the child who wandered too close to the bank. In the story, the victims mount the beautiful horse, entranced by its smooth hide, only to find the surface beneath them grow adhesive, binding their hands. The Kelpie's skin fuses to theirs. With one thunderous leap, it charges into the depths, dragging them alive into silence. The water closes above as if nothing ever moved. In some tales, entire families vanish in this way. Farmers learn to warn their children that the still beauty of water hides deceit. Parents would claim to see hoofprints at the river's edge, prints that led forward but never back. The Kelpie's image became both warning and education, an embodiment of moral and physical caution. Yet, its horror also carried an unsettling charisma. There is something in humanity that admires what it fears. Listeners often found themselves torn between revulsion and fascination, lingering on descriptions of the creature's mane, its muscular grace, its hypnotic smell of damp earth and storm. Such is the magic of the Kelpie. It teaches terror through desire. The force behind the myth deepens further when one meets its cousin, the Aos Sí, the waterhorse of the sea locks and western inlets. If the Kelpie is a murderer by invitation, the Aos Sí is annihilation uninvited. It prowls the coastal locks of the Hebrides, Shetlands, and the far western shores, hungrier, crueler, and infinitely less sentimental. Unlike the Kelpie, which sometimes takes human shape to lure its victims, the Aos Sí often remains horse-like, its hide darker than midnight and slick as a wave. When angered or hungry, it erupts from the sea to devour cattle, livestock, or any soul it meets, leaving the earth salted and still. Where the Kelpie tempts, the Aos Sí consumes. Their distinction lies not just in ferocity, but in domain. The Aos Sí belongs entirely to saltwater, the endless reach of the ocean's pulse, while the Kelpie reigns over fresh inland waters. In Highland folklore, the two creatures mark the difference between what could be controlled and what never could. Rivers were domesticated, channeled, and crossed. Seas remained infinite and unknowable. To the Celts, taming a river meant dialogue with spirits. Facing the sea was an act of reverence verging on submission. The Aos Sí reminds all who stand near the shore that control is illusion. Its arrival is not random. It follows storm patterns, occupying still bays after tempests, feeding on what destruction leaves behind. Legends warn that even touching the mane of such a horse can be fatal. The creature's skin transforms into glue, binding victims fast. Once trapped, humans are carried into the depths, and only their livers rise to the surface later as confirmation of their fate. It is a gruesome detail, but a symbolic one, for the liver was thought to contain the soul's essence in ancient belief. That fragment floating on the waves is humanity's remnant, the proof of having stood too close to what cannot be mastered. Through such symbols, the myth of the Aos Sí reveals itself as both environmental and spiritual law. Approach the gods of without humility, and they will reclaim what arrogance builds. At times, the Kelpie and Aos Sí appear not as punishers, but as reflections of loneliness. The lochs of Scotland are immense and silent, bordered by mist that muffles all sound. It is easy to imagine the shape of a creature emerging where air and water blend. In poetic retellings, the Kelpie is sometimes a condemned being, cursed to remain between worlds until redeemed by human compassion, though none have ever succeeded in freeing it. These softer versions transform terror into grief. The Kelpie becomes a relic of divine despair, a spirit craving companionship, but capable only of destruction. In its seduction lies its tragedy. It kills what it wishes to love. Some of these stories might have evolved from older deities of water and fertility. Before Christianity's rise, rivers and lochs each had their guardians, spirits who demanded offerings for safe passage or good harvest. As faith shifted, those gods were demonized into predators, their blessings reinterpreted as traps. Yet something of the sacred remains in their description. The way locals still lower their voices when speaking of them, the unspoken acknowledgement that the land remembers. Even now, isolated lakes in the Highlands are approached with quiet respect, as though an ancient gaze still lingers beneath the waters. Historical accounts tell of villagers attempting to appease these water spirits through ritual. At midsummer or Samhain, offerings of bread, milk, or silver coins were thrown into the lochs. Travellers crossing solitary rivers would whisper quick prayers or toss a pebble into the current to announce themselves, seeking permission from unseen dwellers below. For communities dependent on the land's seasonal mercy, myth functioned as contract. You offered respect. In return, the world allowed you to pass safely. The Kelpie and Aos Sí embodied that pact's broken side, the outcome when humans forgot their place in the order of things. The transformation from horse to human also carries rich symbolism. Horses represented power, freedom, and prestige within Celtic society. To cast such nobility into monstrous form implies divine warning about the corruption of strength. What was once a noble mount in sunlight turns predatory in darkness, an inversion that mirrors humanity's potential for ruin. In contrast, the Each Uisge's raw brutality belongs less to corruption and more to inevitability. It is the storm incarnate, conscience-free, erasing distinctions between cruelty and necessity. Through both creatures, the Celts express their dual understanding of beautiful, providential, and absolutely ruthless. Even modern literature cannot resist the power of the Kelpie's imagery. The slick black horse emerging from fog has become an icon in art, painting, and folklore collections, a symbol of danger disguised by elegance. To artists, it embodies the allure of self-destruction. To historians, it preserves environmental fear wrapped in myth. Yet deeper than either lies empathy. Every telling acknowledges our fascination with the unknown and our tendency to seek intimacy with what can destroy us. The myth of the waterhorse endures because it reflects the unease within our own reflection, how the most familiar shape can hide the most alien soul. Though terrifying, the Kelpie displays specific rules of engagement that make it less chaos and more test. Offer it true respect, words of reverence, an iron charm carried, averted eyes, and it will pass you by. Iron, the metal believed to repel spirits, remains the element of protection across Celtic lands. The Each Uisge, by contrast, acknowledges no rules. When it rises, only flight saves the living. Sailors claimed that the sound of thundering hooves across the surface of the sea foretold shipwreck. To hear it was to know that prayers had come too late. At its heart, this myth is less about death than about boundaries. The Kelpie and Each Uisge stand as guardians of thresholds. They mark where land ends and incomprehension begins, between safety and peril, life and surrender. The Celts lived in a world intimately aware of such liminality, where the sacred hid inside the everyday. Every time someone drew water, crossed a bridge, or stood before a loch, at sunset, they entered that space of uncertainty. The story of the waterhorses taught humility through awe, the only attitude worthy of the natural world. When twilight gathers upon the Scottish moors and the surface of a loch gleams with a cold shimmer, remember the warning that generations carried in whispers. If the silhouette of a horse appears, do not approach. If its mane drips when no rain falls, and its eyes gleam like still stars, keep your distance. Admire it, but from afar, as one might admire the storm without touching its lightning. The Kelpie's gift is remembrance, the old lesson carved into legend, that beauty without caution is peril in disguise, that the reflection we glimpse in dark water might gaze back, waiting for us to forget which world we belong to. There are monsters whose names evoke fear, and then there are those that silence it entirely. Creatures so dreadful the mind resists picturing them. The Nuckelavee belongs to that latter breed. Born of the northern islands of Orkney, this being transcends imagination, a hybrid of horse and man, so grotesque and raw that even the sea recoils at its presence. The Orkney folk once spoke of it in murmurs, for to utter its name aloud was to summon its attention. It is not merely a legend, but a force, part disease, part vengeance, part living nightmare. The Nuckelavee's form defies. Its upper half resembles a man fused with a horse's back, the two bodies sharing one monstrous frame. Yet the horror lies not in its shape, but in its exposure. The creature is devoid of skin, its muscles laid bare, pulsing and red, veins like cords of blackened kelp writhing across its body. A foul steam rises from it, thick with salt and rot. The horse's mouth drips a yellow foam that scorches earth and seaweed alike. From its chest beats a heart visible and alive, echoing the rhythm of the tide that spawned it. To look upon the Nuckelavee is to glimpse corruption personified, a vision to the folklore of Orkney treated not as fiction, but as warning. The creature's domain lies between sea and land, where the brine meets the soil in endless tension. It emerges most often during the sharp winds of winter, when the boundary between human life and the old wildness thins. The islanders believed the Nuckelavee commanded the storms themselves. When crops failed, when livestock fell sick, or when seaweed harvests spoiled under a sudden taint, the whispers began. The Nuckelavee had ridden that night. Its breath was plague, its presence ruin. It was called a demon by later Christian storytellers, but older oral traditions hint at something more ancient, a personification of natural punishment, born from neglect and arrogance toward the elemental world. Long before written record, the people of Orkney lived under the rule of the sea. Every blessing came from salt water, the fish, the trade winds, even the seaweed used for fuel and fertilizer. But they also knew the sea as jealous, quick to anger. The Nuckelavee represented this fickleness embodied. When humans took too much, polluted the shore, or burned seaweed excessively for profit, the creature rode from the surf to remind them of limits. Its fury symbolized imbalance restored. The earth's revenge, cloaked in the grotesque body of the sea's most forbidden child. Legends describe how the Nuckelavee cannot tolerate fresh water, for it belongs entirely to the salt. This vulnerability offered the only defense. Islanders caught in its path knew to flee toward rivers or streams, for even the smallest trickle of fresh water created a barrier the beast could not cross. That single detail reveals the myth's deep logic. Freshwater and seawater were opposing powers, their eternal friction defining Orkney's survival. Each had its own spirits, its own codes, and trespassing between them uninvited was perilous. The story thus preserved ecological boundaries far before they bore that name. The Nuckelavee's behaviour blends both intelligence and malice. It is said to breathe storms into existence, whipping winds into whirlpools with its nostrils. Its mere proximity corrupts life. Corn blights spread where its breath drifts. Cattle grow sick in fields it crosses. For this reason, older villagers saw epidemics as signs of its passage. Yet the creature is not pure evil. Its rage is retribution, not chaos. In its twisted way, the Nuckelavee enforces balance where humanity fails. Each act of destruction restores the old order, reminding every islander that survival requires humility before the sea. One of the most enduring encounters comes from the story of an Orkney man named Tamas, recorded through generations of oral retelling. Returning home one night under a pale moon, Tamas saw a shape rising from the surf, a horse larger than any he had ever seen, its hide glimmering strangely. Then he realized there was no hide at all. From its shoulders grew a rider with grotesque, writhing arms, whose fingers nearly brushed the ground. The smell struck him first, like burning kelp and decay. The creature turned its head toward him, and where its eyes should have been, shone two pits of white light, pulsing in rhythms like breath. Tamas fled, the pounding of unseen hooves following across the moor. Only when he leapt a narrow stream did the sound cease. He dared glance back once, and the Nuckelavee was gone. After that night, he never approached the sea at dusk again. Such tales were never told for mere fright. They served as moral cartography, charting invisible borders that kept humanity and the wild world apart. The Nuckelavee punished greed. It punished complacency. It embodied the principle that every gift of demands respect. In years when overharvesting of seaweed poisoned the beaches, or when fishermen took more than tides could replace, the islanders did not curse their luck. They whispered apologies into the wind, hoping the creature would be appeased. Fear, in this sense, maintained sustainability long before the word existed. In more symbolic readings, the Nuckelavee personifies disease itself. During outbreaks of plague or famine, the people explain their suffering through the monster's invisible breath. It represented contagion roaming untethered, both literal and moral. By externalizing terror in such form, the mind could confront it indirectly, transforming helplessness into caution. To name the affliction as a beast was to regain control through narrative, and by doing so, the Orkney folk gave their despair a shape old enough to be respected and feared, rather than merely endured. The creature's skinless body may also conceal older ritual meanings. Many scholars believe its anatomy mirrors early sacrificial rites involving exposed flesh and renewal through decay. The absence of skin, the boundary between inside and out, symbolizes a cosmological truth, that separation between elements, between safety and exposure, is fragile. The Nuckelavee walks where those boundaries dissolve, where flesh meets air as sea meets land. It is the living embodiment of dissolution itself, a phenomenon every Celt understood as sacred transformation, no matter how terrible it appeared. Interestingly, the Nuckelavee almost never appears on land unprovoked. Its resentment is reactionary, called forth by human corruption. In this sense, it is both avenger and victim, chained to the balance it enforces. It cannot rest because humanity cannot cease to transgress. It drives storms inland not from cruelty, but from necessity, expelling pollution and arrogance in tides of ruin. Thus, the Orkney people viewed the creature ambivalently, their destroyer, yet in a grim way, their protector also. Without its punishment, the world would drift into excess. The Celts saw no contradiction in fear and reverence existing side by side. To fear a god or spirit was to honor its power. The Nuckelavee, like the Cailleach or the Banshee, belonged to that holy terror, the awe that humbles humanity before natural law. Even Christianity, though it despised pagan monsters, could not completely erase the logic of respect. The clergy called it demonic, yet even they taught villagers not to anger the sea through waste. The old beliefs found new disguises, their essence undiminished. Fear became morality, sin became imbalance, and the Nuckelavee remained the image of consequence. In artistic terms, the creature's grotesque form has inspired imagery for centuries, yet those who depict it often fail to grasp its significance. The horror of the Nuckelavee is not meant to provoke disgust, but remembrance. Its raw anatomy is allegory, the exposed heart of the world, bleeding for every insult humanity commits against the living earth. Its very ugliness reminds viewers that life's beauty depends on invisible balance. Without such guardians, darkness would no longer be punishment, but fate. On the islands, it was said that even when unseen, the Nuckelavee leaves traces. Grass turns brittle where its hoof struck. Dead fish appear where its vapor drifted. The scent of brine, sharp and metallic, lingers for days after. Itself bears witness to its passing. To this day, sudden fish kills or strange sea fogs are still spoken of in hushed tones among older islanders as warnings that the old spirit stirs again. The myth persists because the world remains fragile, and the lesson it carries still fits the age. Stand upon the cliffs of Orkney on a winter night, and you will understand why such legends survive. The wind shrieks like a voice. The ocean roars like breath through a wounded throat. Every sound feels alive, as if something vast and sentient lies just beyond sight. In that timeless moment, you are a guest in a kingdom far older than humanity. The air itself feels watchful. You might sense beneath the crash of waves the muffled thunder of hooves pacing the dark shoreline. The old folk would tell you not to linger. Walk inland before moonrise, find a stream, and whisper gratitude for the life the sea allows you. For if the Nuckelavee turns its gaze upon you this night, no prayer will save you. Only the memory that some boundaries are not meant to be crossed. Beneath the emerald hills of Ireland, beyond the reach of mortal eyes, lie the courts of the Aos Sí, the people of the mounds. Their name means the fair folk, but the word fair here does not imply kindness. It means terrifying beauty, the kind that blinds and consumes, the beauty that belongs only to the gods. To the Celts, these beings were not diminutive sprites or whimsical fairies, as later tales would suggest. They were deities and ancient rulers who once walked openly among humankind before withdrawing into the hollow hills when the age of men began. The Aos Sí are the descendants, or perhaps the very remnants, of the Tuatha Dé Danann, the people of the goddess Danu, long before the arrival of Christianity, before even the Celts themselves had carved their myths into memory. The Tuatha Dé Danann ruled the lands of Ireland as divine kings, poets, and warriors. They mastered arts of magic and craft so advanced that later generations could only describe them as supernatural. Yet, after their defeat by the mortal Milesians, they were said to retreat beneath the earth, claiming the Sid Mounds as their new kingdoms. There, they transformed into immortals of twilight, neither fully gods nor mortals, existing in perpetual secrecy beneath the skin of the world. Each Sid Mound became a passage to their realm, a place where time bends and distances lose meaning. These hollow hills, scattered across Ireland and glowing faintly under moonlight, were thought to hum with unseen activity. Farmers avoided disturbing them, building their fields in arcs around certain slopes, lest they offend the inhabitants below. Offerings of milk, bread, or honey were left at the entrances, both as tribute and as insurance. To anger the Aos Sí was to invite misfortune so absolute that no priest or healer could undo it. Therefore, generations learned to live in cautious harmony with what slept beneath their feet. The Tuatha Dé Danann themselves are recorded as semi-divine figures, each embodying elemental aspects of existence. The Dagda, the Great Father, carried a cauldron that never emptied, symbolizing abundance and knowledge. Lug of the Long Arm mastered every craft and weapon known, representing the totality of human skill. Brigid, goddess of poetry, fire, and healing, inspired both monks and bards long after her divine name was softened into sainthood. These were not distant gods demanding temples. They were immanent powers, inhabiting every well, hearth, and oak grove. The Aos Sí are their afterimage, their continuation into eternity through myth's shadow. To understand the Aos Sí is to understand the Celtic notion of liminality. They exist not in heaven nor hell, but in between. Their world, called Tir na Nog, the land of youth, is described as a perfect mirror of earth, more luminous and vibrant, yet perilously deceptive. Time passes differently there. A day within might equal centuries outside. Mortals who visit rarely return the same. Those who eat or drink within its borders are bound to it forever, caught in a timeless serenity that masks a terrible loss. Memory erased, humanity dissolved into endless delight. Thus, Tir na Nog serves as both paradise and prison, a warning disguised as dream. The Aos Sí appear in many guises across Irish folklore, from radiant queens in white robes to shadowed hunters wrapped in night. They can bless or curse with equal grace. Some reward kindness with treasures that turn to leaves by dawn, teaching humility in generosity. Others punish arrogance or harm to with illness or madness. Each action of theirs reflects the Celtic law of reciprocity, Every gift carries weight, every neglect carries consequence. To live with respect toward the unseen world was to live rightly. To ignore it was to court ruin. Among all their stories, certain figures stand out, bridging divinity and mythic folklore. There is Angus Og, the god of eternal youth, who inhabits Brú na Bóinne, Newgrange, where sunlight pierces his chamber once each winter solstice. He governs dreams and love, able to heal hearts, but never keep one. His realm is said to shimmer with music so sweet it stills grief. Then there is the Morrigan, the phantom queen of fate and battle, who rides upon the storm, shrieking across battlefields as ravens circle overhead. She is prophecy and power, goddess of victory and decay, proving that the Aos Sí do not conform to human morality, but embody cycles of creation and destruction without remorse. Their queen, often known as Ain, or sometimes as the fairy queen herself, rules from Knockany Hill in County Limerick. She presides over midsummer as both patron and predator of fertility. Farmers feared her favour as much as her wrath. If crops flourished too greatly, they might owe her a debt taken in livestock or children. Her laughter was said to drift over fields at the turning of the year, reminding villagers that abundance comes at a cost. Yet offerings to Aine could also bring prosperity and peace, proving that even the most fearsome spirit could be swayed by courtesy and ritual. The Tuatha Dé Danann's fall into the earth forms one of Celtic mythology's most haunting metamorphoses. Their retreat was not defeat, but transformation. They became inseparable from the land, its breath, its rhythm, its hidden conscience. Some stories claim that they chose this exile willingly, preferring the eternity of secrecy to the frailty of worship. Their new kingdom beneath the soil was neither death nor concealment, but renewal. By surrendering visibility, they preserved power. This notion that retreat can be a continuation rather than an ending remains one of the most profound insights left by Celtic imagination. Folk belief describes constant friction between humanity and the Aos Sí. Roads built across fairy paths often brought inexplicable disasters: machinery breaking, livestock dying, workers falling ill. Even today, some rural communities will reroute construction rather than disturb a fairy tree, a single thorn or oak standing where nothing else grows. These customs, passed from generation to generation, reflect something deeper than superstition. They express a worldview grounded in mutual respect with the environment, treating the land as not merely resource, but relationship. The Aos Sí are not entirely antagonistic to humanity. Many old tales tell of marriages between mortals and fairy lovers, unions, both wondrous and doomed. These partners, radiant and strange, demanded secrecy, for exposure to sunlight or church bells would force their return below forever. The children born of such unions often bore extraordinary talents: healers, poets, or musicians, said to carry the spark of the Tuatha Dé Danann in their veins. Yet, just as often, such children vanished young, drawn back to the timeless realm. These stories reinforce the Celtic idea that genius and sorrow are siblings, born of contact with the divine. Perhaps the most remarkable quality of the Aos Sí lies in their persistence. While other mythologies vanished under the weight of conquest and doctrine, these beings adapted, shifting forms to survive. When Christianity swept across Ireland, the Tuatha Dé Danann were reimagined as fallen angels, not demonic, but proud spirits too noble for hell and too proud for heaven. Later, they became the fairy aristocracy of folklore, living in courts of gold under green hills. Even in these later, softened versions, remnants of divinity linger, the majesty of gods small enough to hide in the dew. To encounter the Aos Sí tradition says, is to be drawn into silence. No words can be spoken in their presence without danger. If they offer food, you must refuse. If they call your name, you must not answer unless invited thrice. Their music entrances but steals years from the listener's life. Yet, to show respect, by lifting your hat to certain hills, by mending a broken stone wall near a fairy fort rather than destroying it, earns subtle blessings. Cows give sweeter milk, ships find favorable winds, and dreams carry messages from ancestors you never met. Through courtesy, the living maintain truce with immortality. The Aos Sí embody a haunting paradox central to all Celtic tradition. The gods never disappeared. They simply changed address. They dwell in earth rather than sky, in whisper rather than thunder, reminding humankind that the divine is not elsewhere, but always beside us, waiting beneath moss and mist. Every fairy mound is thus a shrine, every well a threshold, every breeze a breath of the old pantheon. The Celts did not worship distance, they worshipped nearness. And so, in every story of the Aos Sí and the Tuatha Dé Danann, what we encounter is not a lost mythology, but an eternal one, alive wherever people walk gently upon the land and remember that mystery is still the truest language of. So, the next time you cross an Irish field at dusk and the air turns strangely still, pause before stepping upon a mound of grass that rises just slightly higher than its surroundings. The birds may fall silent, and the wind might hold its breath. Offer a few words of goodwill or a fragment of bread, and leave without looking back. For beneath that mound, behind the glowing threshold of another age, the ancient gods still listen, their patience as vast as the halls they built beneath the hills. Among the tangled hedgerows of Ireland and the windswept hollows of Wales and Scotland lives the Púca, a creature of chaos, mischief, and unseen transformation. The name itself derives from the same linguistic root as the English puck, meaning spirit or goblin, yet it carries far older echoes than any play or story could contain. The Púca is neither friend nor foe. It is a keeper of disorder, a reminder that the world beyond human order laughs at our fragile rules. It appears sometimes as a black stallion with burning eyes, elsewhere as a goat, eagle, or shaggy dog. And when the night deepens, it may wear a human face, smiling too widely, its laughter curling like smoke. No single form defines the Púca because its essence is fluidity. It delights in shape-shifting, in confusing boundaries between beast and man, shadow and substance. Farmers once dreaded October's end, for the Púca was said to roam openly after Samhain, the night when the veil between worlds thins and spirits walk freely. Across Ireland, tradition held that fruits left unharvested after this date belonged to the Púca alone. To touch them was to invite illness or misfortune. Some families left portions of food on farm walls or windowsills, not as tribute to a monster, but as acknowledgement of a guest older than ownership. In those gestures, reverence and fear existed in equal measure. Legends tell of travelers encountering the Púca disguised as a majestic horse, waiting by the roadside under a silver moon. It calls softly, almost kindly, promising a swift ride through the countryside. Those who accept soon realize they have made a mistake. Clinging to its mane, they find themselves vaulting over rivers, crashing through briars, and soaring across impossible distances. Just before dawn, the creature throws its riders into mud or cold streams and vanishes, leaving behind laughter like fluttering wings. No one dies from the Púca's games, but no one forgets them either. Its mischief, though cruel, carries meaning. Arrogance dissolves when confronted with power that cannot be tamed. In other regions, the Púca could also bless those who showed respect. To some farmers, it whispered warnings of bad weather, or advised when crops would flourish, Cows that grazed under its gaze were said to give sweeter milk, provided their owners left a gift of berries or grain. But slight it, mock it, deny it gratitude, and the Púca's blessing turned to sabotage. Milk would sour in seconds, and harvests would rot overnight. The duality of the creature mirrors itself. The same wind that cools the skin can uproot an entire field by dawn. Thus, the Púca taught an older morality, one not based on good and evil, but on balance and humility. The creature's trickster connects it to similar spirits across Europe. The Welsh Pwca, the Cornish Bucca, and even the Norse Puckle. Yet Ireland made the myth its own, blending mischief with moral instruction. The Púca's transformations served as living allegory for the instability of human fortune. In its eyes, kings and beggars are equal playthings. This fluid hierarchy of consequence, where today's laughter may become tomorrow's lesson, reflects a uniquely Celtic understanding of fate, not as punishment, but as rhythm. The Púca's laughter is not mockery of humankind, but of delusion, the belief that control is permanent. As the centuries moved and belief evolved, another myth rose beside it, darker and more intimate, that of the changeling. Where the Púca mocked, the changeling coerced. It crept into the private world of the hearth and cradle, stealing infants and replacing them with its own pale imitation. To poor families in rural Ireland and Scotland, it explained the sudden strangeness of a once healthy child who grew silent, sickly, or wary of touch. The changeling was not a ghost, but a fairy child, left behind by the Aos Sí as they took the human infant to their realm. Some said it was an exchange, others a theft, and still others, a cruel joke meant to punish those who neglected proper rituals. Unlike the Púca, the changeling legend deals not with joy, but despair. It speaks to the love and terror that twine around childhood, to parents facing mystery without remedy. A changeling looked human, but was not human. Its laugh was brittle, its eyes ancient, and its appetite insatiable. Villagers claimed such children avoided iron, church bells, or holy water. They cried under moonlight but grew calm near old stones or forest edges. Each detail was symbolic, a way for communities to frame unbearable loss through faith in an unseen order. The tales turned tragedy into cosmology, giving meaning to grief by transforming it into contact with the divine. Protective rituals abounded. New mothers placed iron scissors beside the cradle, for iron repelled fairy magic. Bread baked with salt was carried in the mother's pocket during visits from neighbours, since strangers might serve as fairy agents without knowing it. Fires were kept burning day and night after birth to deter spirits drawn to new life's warmth. Despite these precautions, the fear of replacement never truly vanished. Every mother in Old Ireland and Scotland looked twice at her child when its behaviour changed suddenly, remembering the whispered warnings. Watch for the ones who are not your own. Yet even within its horror, the changeling story contains empathy. It asks what it means to belong and how communities face difference. Some children labelled changelings may have been ill, disabled, or neurodivergent, conditions their era could not explain. In that sense, the myth speaks to the attempt to understand the inexplicable through imagination, rather than cruelty. When viewed gently, the changeling reveals an ancient longing to frame suffering within narrative, to exchange helplessness for meaning. The fairies become both cause and comfort, standing in for forces too vast to confront directly. Popular versions of the myth describe how a suspected changeling might confess under trickery. A mother might brew beer in an eggshell or perform an absurd dance near the fire, Seeing this, the imposter child, offended or delighted, would laugh and speak, declaring its long age or fairy parentage. The moment it revealed itself, it vanished, leaving the true child returned or lost forever. Though superstitious, these performances carried psychological healing. They allowed families to act, to reclaim agency in situations of uncertainty. In doing so, they externalized fear and transformed paralysis into ritual. Curiously, both the Púca and changeling myths revolve around exchange, one playing with mortals for amusement, the other trading human lives for fairy replacements. In both, the human world's stability depends on boundaries being respected. The Púca teaches caution in the wilderness. The changeling warns of vigilance within the home. Between them lies the full spectrum of Celtic caution toward the supernatural, reverence without surrender, curiosity bound by ritual. Folk culture thrived upon that equilibrium, ensuring harmony through constant storytelling. The changeling myth also reinforces a vital concept in Celtic belief. Names and identity hold power. To know something's true, name was to command or protect it. Parents were cautioned never to boast about their newborn's beauty, nor speak their names aloud near running water. The fairies, jealous of human vitality, were drawn to praise and vanity. Thus, humility became armor. Words of protection filled daily speech, transforming ordinary language into ritualized prayer. Every phrase carried intent, every silence concealed fear. Both stories, the trickster's laughter and the stolen child's sorrow, demonstrate how mythology shapes moral consciousness. The Púca mocks those who take life lightly. The changeling humbles those who assume safety within walls. Through their contrast, Celtic lore argues that danger lives not only in desolate moors or forest paths, but in the spaces we call home. Each myth translates existential dread into local folklore, grounding universal truths in the rhythms of tide and hearth. In them, we glimpse a world where magic is not escape but education, teaching through terror what reverence forgets. In modern retellings, the Púca often emerges as anti-hero, mysterious and alluring, neither savior nor fiend. The changeling continues to fascinate, a symbol of otherness and displacement. Artists, poets, and storytellers return to these figures because they capture something timeless. The tension between belonging and exile, between familiarity and the abyss. Whether born from psychological need or divine intuition, their stories persist because they mirror the unease buried in every heart. The fear that what we love most might be taken and what we trust most might deceive. And so, when you walk home through the Irish countryside and a strange horse watches you from the mist, remember the Púca's rule. Refuse the ride, however tempting. Bow, speak politely, and continue on your way. If, instead, you hear laughter from an empty path, hurry indoors, for mischief loves an audience. And if late one night your child wakes with ancient eyes and a voice too knowing for its years, whisper a prayer of protection and hold fast to love, whatever its shape. For in these tales of deception and devotion lies a single truth, that humanity, when faced with the uncanny, never stops trying to understand the light flickering on the edge of the unknown. Among all the beings of Celtic myth, few disturb and enchant the human heart as irresistibly as the fairy lovers. They are creatures of desire and demise, whose affection grants both ecstasy and ruin. The Lianan Side and the Gansana, her male counterpart, symbolize the seductive peril of beauty unbounded by mortality. They are muses to poets and dreamers, predators to souls who mistake inspiration for love. In their stories, passion is not salvation, it is surrender. The name Lianan Side means fairy lover, or the sweetheart of the mounds. She emerges from the twilight world of the Aos Sí to seek communion with mortal men, offering them creative brilliance in exchange for devotion. Those she chooses bloom with genius, but fade swiftly, consumed by longing. Poets who encounter her produce verses of haunting perfection before dying in solitude, as though the flame she lent them burned too brightly for mortal vessels. She's both muse and widowmaker, patron of art and embodiment of depletion. Descriptions of her vary from region to region. Some see her as a woman cloaked in red, her hair glimmering like spun copper, her eyes holding centuries of merriment and melancholy. Others claim she appears as a shadowed figure, her face flawless yet indistinct, impossible to recall even moments after she departs. Always, she carries an air of melancholy splendor, as if she knows the doom her affection promises and cannot cease offering it. The Leannan Cedar is the living paradox of Celtic cosmology, beauty entwined with tragedy, love inseparable from death. In older Irish folklore, the Leannan Cedar was not purely malicious. She did not hunt her lovers through trickery, but sought mutual surrender. She craved the spark of mortality, the fragile, fleeting pulse that gave art its pain. To touch a human soul was to feel creation again, something immortality had stolen from her. Yet the exchange always demanded sacrifice. Passion's brilliance devoured the human spirit, leaving the body an exquisite ruin. The lesson is clear. Even love from divine hands cannot coexist with human endurance. Bards and artists often invoked her as explanation for their torment. The poet, haunted by endless ideas, claimed her kiss. The painter, who starved for his vision, swore she whispered in his dreams. In these myths, inspiration itself becomes possession. The creative fire, once seen as divine gift, turns parasitic when its source resides beyond mortal reach. Such tales echo through every age, the artist consumed by their work, the dreamer undone by perfection. The Leannan Cedar, in this way, personifies the peril of chasing transcendence with mortal flesh. The Gancana, whose name translates as the love talker, mirrors her in masculine form. In contrast to her ethereal sorrow, he is described as charming and sly, a wanderer whose beauty and voice entice women into despair. Often dressed as a traveling bard or soldier, he carries a faint scent of pipe smoke and honeyed words, tools of enchantment rather than weaponry. To meet his gaze is to forget caution. Those who fall for him experience bliss so profound that life thereafter feels colorless. When he departs, and he always does, they wither in longing, their spirits hollowed by absence. Some storytellers cast the Gancana not as deliberate killer, but as embodiment of desire itself, an eternal drifter cursed by his own seductive gift. It is said that he cannot feel love, only provoke it. Every encounter is rehearsal for redemption that never arrives. In this interpretation, he becomes the tragic reflection of humanity's own appetite for unattainable affection. The women who follow him are casualties of a passion that cannot find home. He leaves no violence behind, only an echo, a ghost of yearning that lingers long after his footsteps fade. Both the Leannan Cedar and the Gancana belong to a classification of dangerous fae known as the solitary fairies, those who dwell apart from the joyful courts of the Aos Sí. Their isolation gives them depth, a loneliness that sharpens their appetite for mortal company. Yet mortality is poison to them, and their company brings ruin to mortals. Their relationships exist on the threshold of doom, where vitality and decay meet in embrace. These pairings embody one of Celtic culture's deepest insights: that human life, though fragile, draws the envy of eternity precisely because it ends. Myths of fairy lovers serve practical and moral purposes as well. They cautioned against reckless passion, against the surrender of reason to beauty. In societies bound by strict codes of modesty and survival, such tales express the tension between duty and desire. The Leannan Cedar, with her intoxicating promise of glory, reflects the danger of indulgence, the price of chasing divine experience without the strength to bear its consequence. The Gancanach Hasses Piss. Downchasty charm warns against illusion, against mistaking fantasy for fulfillment. Together, they teach restraint not through prohibition, but through the ache of consequences remembered in song. Their existence also hints at an ancient intertwining between art and sacrifice. In Ireland, inspiration was once considered a form of possession called imbas, a divine intoxication that overwhelmed the poet. Those chosen by the Leannan Cedar were said to receive this fire directly from her kiss. To refuse was to remain ordinary. To accept was to burn. Many believed that true creativity required such a dangerous pact, that the boundary between genius and madness was itself a fairy contract. Even outside mythology, the echo of this idea persists, that creation demands something be given up in return. Interestingly, not all encounters ended in destruction. Some legends speak of men who managed to outwit or satisfy the Leannan Cedar without perishing. A clever poet, aware of her hunger, might redirect it by channeling devotion into craft rather than surrender. Each poem he wrote became offering, each song a shield against her consuming desire. But such victories were temporary. In the end, every mortal aged while she remained untouched by time. This imbalance made love impossible. Therefore, in every version of her tale lies a note of mercy disguised as parting. She leaves before the mortal can beg her to stay. In art, the Leannan Cedar evolved into symbol of romantic fatalism. Painters of the 19th century depicted her haloed, in crimson, clutching sleeping poets as if in mourning for what must die to make beauty endure. Writers reimagined her as the eternal muse, half angel, half predator. Her touch ignited imagination and decay alike. Through her, generations explored the cost of love that exceeds human scale, the seduction of transcendence, the tragedy of excellence. She remains the emblem of inspiration's dual face, one radiant, the other ruinous. The Gancana, meanwhile, often appears in folk songs as the stranger who arrives in spring and vanishes with autumn's chill. His voice promises forever, but his presence lasts only a season. Symbolically, he represents the fleeting intoxication of first love, a feverish bloom destined to fade. His victims do not die of his kiss, but of memory, unable to endure the echo of what they once felt. He personifies life's bittersweet rhythm, where every joy is already shadowed by its loss. Like his counterpart, he teaches that beauty without permanence is still worth touching, if only to remember it existed. The enduring fascination with these lovers lies in their ability to dramatize universal truths. Love and death, art and exhaustion, joy and despair all merge in their stories. They do not offer redemption but revelation. The Leannan Cedar reveals that creation is communion with forces beyond comprehension, and that those forces demand more than we can give. The Gancana reveals that desire lives not in the body, but in the imagination, and once awakened, it never truly sleeps. Their myths do not moralize so much as mirror humanity's restless longing for the infinite within the fleeting. In the context of Celtic spirituality, both beings emphasize relationship over isolation. Love, art, and mortality form an eternal triad, Each feeds the other. To deny desire is to silence creativity. To surrender entirely is to vanish into madness. The ideal, as the Druids once taught, lies in harmony, in walking the narrow path where passion kindles but does not consume. Perhaps that is the deeper meaning behind these stories, that to feel deeply is both privilege and trial, requiring wisdom to survive the fire and humility to accept its fading. Should you ever hear faint footsteps in the forest, or music flowing from no visible source, take heed. Beauty that calls without warning is rarely benign. If a stranger of storm-bright eyes invites you to dance beneath the moon, know that every embrace is an agreement, and every kiss a covenant. Walk away if you can, but if you cannot, understand that what you give will never return the same. Such is the way of the Leonin cedar and the Gankana, the lovers of otherworldly fire, whose affection grants eternity's glimpse but shortens the measure of human time. Before gods and fairies, before mortals and kings, there were the Fomorians, the first and most ancient beings of Celtic mythology. Their presence haunts the oldest Irish tales like echoes of a storm that never ended. They are the shadow behind creation, the darkness before order, and the monsters whose defeat shaped the world. To speak of them is to speak of origins, for without their cruelty and might, civilization would never have learned to stand upright. The Fomorians were not demons in the Christian sense, but forces made flesh, embodiments of chaos, entropy, and the raw violence of untamed. In the earliest stories, they rose from the sea, colossal and terrifying, their shapes unfit for mortal imagination. Some were described as one-eyed, one-legged, and one-armed. Others carried dozens of limbs or heads, symbols of primal disorder. They were beings born from the depths of the ocean and the dark recesses of the earth, representing everything wild and ungoverned. They ruled Ireland before the coming of the divine Tuatha Dé Danann, lording over humankind with tyranny and hunger. The constant war between these two races, the Tuatha and the Fomorians, epitomized the eternal conflict between creation and destruction, light and shadow. The Fomorians were led by Baela of the Evil Eye, a giant whose mere gaze could kill an army. His closed eyelid was heavy as stone, lifted only when his followers required devastation. When opened, his eye emitted a fire that consumed life and hope alike. Those who stared into its glow did not die as mortals do. They were reduced into smoke, as though never born. Baela ruled from Tory Island, off Ireland's coast, a fortress shrouded in storm and mist. To this day, the island stands as a monument to his legend, where sea and land crash eternally in remembrance of his reign. Under Baela's command, the Fomorians enacted relentless oppression upon both gods and men. They demanded tributes of grain, milk, and children, consuming not just the flesh, but the spirit of those they conquered. Each offering was less sustenance than ritual humiliation, a reminder that humanity existed only by their decree. Their vast ships blockade the shores, and their monstrous forms stride inland whenever famine or flood swept the land. The ocean itself seemed their ally. Storms answered their wrath, waves their laughter. Yet, for all their power, the Fomorians were bound by arrogance. Their tyranny carried within it the seed of their undoing. Legend tells that Baela's daughter, Ethniu, was destined to bear a child who would one day kill him. To prevent this, Baela locked her in a tower, surrounded by guards and iron walls. But prophecy ignored cannot be broken. One day, Cailleach of the Tuatha Dé Danann breached the tower and fathered a son with Ethniu. That child was Lugh, the shining god of skill and art, whose arrival marked the turning of history. When Lugh reached manhood, he led the Tuatha Dé Danann against Baela and his monstrous kin in the Second Battle of Mag Tuairid, a conflict so vast that the earth shook and the sea boiled. It was a war between order and chaos, between everything that could be measured and everything that defied measure. The battle unfolded like a storm given form. The Fomorians' armies were legion, a mass of twisted giants whose steps rippled the ground. The Tuatha, though lesser in number, possessed craft and knowledge. At their front stood Lu, radiant as a comet. When he met Baela on the field, prophecy fulfilled itself with merciless symmetry. Baela, prying open his deadly eye, sought to annihilate his grandson, but Lu struck first, driving a spear through that cursed organ, hurling its burning essence back into the monster's own army. The Fomorians broke, their cries splitting the mountains. With Baela's fall, their dominion over Ireland ended. The world, at last, belonged to the rule of balance. Yet, even in defeat, the Fomorians never vanished. Myth insists that they retreated beneath the waves into caverns under the Western Sea, where they remain eternal, waiting. The people of later ages believed that every tempest sweeping the coast was their breath, every unseasonal darkness, their stirring dreams. They became the embodied memory of destruction, proof that chaos is never truly gone, merely sleeping, patient as time itself. In this way, the Fomorians evolved from villains into symbols, reminders that the price of order is constant vigilance and that never forgets its primordial independence. What makes them extraordinary in myth is their moral ambiguity. Though monstrous, they were essential. Without them, the Tuatha Dé Danann would have had no adversary to define their purpose, no crucible through which wisdom could emerge. The Fomorians represent the necessary opposition, suffering and entropy, as the foundation upon which renewal is built. This dualism echoes through Celtic thought, where even destruction holds sanctity. The sea, which nurtures life, is the same force that drowns it. The storm that devastates the harvest also renews the soil. In the Fomorian legacy, chaos is not evil. It is the relentless motion of existence. Traces of their memory persisted in the folklore of Ireland and Scotland long after the myths became legends. Islanders along the western coast whispered that the Fomorians still walked the sea floor, their massive eyes glowing like submerged suns. Fishermen avoided sailing after certain tides, claiming the waves heard voices from below. The Fomorians, they said, despised arrogance most of all, those who forgot the perils of the deep or challenged its dominion. To this day, such warnings resonate in island culture, where respect for the sea borders on reverence. Symbolically, the Fomorians reflect the earliest Celtic understanding of as impartial cruelty. The Celts did not view the world as moral in a human sense. The earthquake and the famine, the bloom and the harvest, all were expressions of a living continuum. The Fomorians embodied the untamed aspect of this continuum, the darkness that defined light by its absence. The world's balance required both: civilization emerging through struggle, clarity sharpened by chaos. In that duality, the myth achieves its philosophical depth. There are no permanent victors, only temporary harmonies carved from inevitable disorder. Celtic art and ritual carried echoes of that reverence. Carved stones showing monstrous visages or spiraling waves were thought to honor the Fomorians as arch-spirits of the natural world's fury. Some ancient cairns were even placed along coastlines, in mimicry of their legend, facing the west where Baela's realm was believed to lie. When storm struck, the people would light fires in high towers or on cliffs, a gesture not of defense but of communication, signaling respect to the primordial ones who still ruled the deep. It was an unspoken pact between the visible world and its unseen foundation. Though the Tuatha Dé Danann and their descendants symbolized refinement, art, and law, the Fomorians remained necessary in the cosmic story. They embodied the truth that the universe thrives in tension, not harmony. The Celtic worldview found poetry in that struggle, recognizing that without darkness, light loses meaning. Without risk, survival is hollow. Even their monstrous forms, so extravagant in myth, served as metaphors for the shape of fear itself. Limitless, faceless, impossible to categorize. Fear of hunger, of wave, of tempest. The Fomorians were all these things made immortal. In later centuries, as Christianity spread through Ireland, the Fomorians were reimagined as fallen angels or demons drowned by divine wrath. Yet beneath the dogma, traces of their older grandeur survived. They remained too vast for the confines of sin alone, too elemental for moral simplification. They were absorbed into the natural theology of the land itself, embodied in cliffs, storms, and roaring tides. To stand upon the shore during a gale was to feel their breath, reminding humanity of its smallness before creation's ancient memory. Ultimately, the saga of the Fomorians is not one of defeat, but transformation. Their story illustrates the perpetual cycle of Celtic cosmology, creation emerging from destruction, harmony built upon conflict, and balance sustained by constant change. The Tuatha Dé Danann may have claimed the surface, but the Fomorians claimed the depths, ensuring that the universe would never fall still. Each wave pounding Ireland's coast retells the myth, a heartbeat of the world that will never end. For in every act of renewal, something must die to make room for life anew. That is the lesson of the Fomorians, the truth that every seed grows from shadow, and every light owes its brilliance to the darkness that came before. Among the vast assembly of Celtic beings, few form a group as peculiar as the solitary Fae, the spirits who shunned fairy courts and human fellowship alike. Unlike the noble hosts of the Aos Sí or the dreadful warriors of the Fomorians, these creatures walk alone, wandering crossroads, cellars, and hearths. They are tricksters and artisans, jesters and misers, beings bound not by grandeur, but by habit and irony. Their stories resonate with humour and cruelty mingled, for in them the Celts found both mirror and mockery of humankind's own contradictions. Through their antics, laughter often preludes fear. Foremost among them stands the Fardarig, whose name means red man or red one. He is often described as small and stout, dressed entirely in crimson from cap to boots, and carrying within that colour every shade of mischief. Unlike the playful leprechaun, the Fardarig is a jesting ghost, a figure of cruel laughter and morbid games. He delights in imitating death, slipping into homes at night to whisper from shadows or lie in beds pretending to be corpses. Farmers would wake to find their blankets disturbed, the hearth cold, and faint chuckles echoing near the door. Yet despite his unsettling sense of humour, he kills no one. His aim is terror, not harm. In his laughter lies the boundary where folly teeters against madness. The Fardarig belongs to that peculiar Celtic tradition where fear is tempered by satire. His presence reminds listeners that to mock death is to lessen its hold, even when surrounded by darkness. Some tales portray him visiting mourners, seating himself at wakes among the grieving, before bursting into hideous laughter. He knows no decorum, yet he embodies an unexpected wisdom, that despair becomes bearable only when laughter survives it. To the superstitious, however, his arrival was omen enough. Once he visits, another follows, they would say, meaning that true death never lingered far behind his jest. Closely bound to him by spirit and contradiction is the leprechaun. The more familiar, yet misunderstood, solitary fae. Stripped by modern amusement into caricature, the real leprechaun of Irish lore is a figure of solitude, craft, and relentless cunning. Descriptions differ. Sometimes an old man in a patched green coat and cocked hat. Other times a grimy craftsman with hammer and shoe. Always he is industrious, always alone. He spends his days mending footwear for the fairy aristocracy, his hammering echoing faintly through dusk meadows. To hear that rhythmic tap, tap, tap was to know he was near, and to fear the greed his presence awakened. Leprechauns were said to guard great treasures buried long before the coming of men. Their hoards, amassed through centuries of dealing with mortals, glimmered beneath ancient oaks or within hidden wells. The mortal who captured one could, with quick wit and unbreakable nerves, demand a single wish or gold in exchange for release. Yet none who tried ever succeeded for long. The leprechaun's cleverness matched his small stature. He deceived with riddles and diversions, promising riches while slipping from captors' grasp. In this way, he symbolized the futility of greed, the eternal chase for reward that dissolves just when it is grasped. In older Irish households, the leprechaun's legacy was both fearsome and moral. Parents warned children not to go after imagined treasures or disturb old glens. The creature's hoarded gold was never meant for use, but for temptation, a mirror to the human hunger for more. Stories told by firesides often ended with the lesson that wealth unearned brings ruin. Yet for every moralist who saw in the leprechaun a villain, another saw in him the survivor, the last craftsman of a dying fairy age, living quietly among tools and memory while the world changed beyond recognition. Unlike the graceful beings of courtly myth, both the Far Darrig and the leprechaun inhabit the ragged edges of magical Ireland. They dwell not in glowing hills, but in cellars, bog huts, or tree roots slick with rain. This proximity to the mundane gives them extraordinary realism. They are not distant gods, but echoes of old neighbors, slightly uncanny, half tolerated, always dangerous to underestimate. Through them, Celtic folklore preserved its earthy humor, its suspicion of perfection, and its awareness that folly often wears a familiar face. Not all solitary fae delight in laughter, however. Among their ranks wander grim spirits of isolation, the cluricaun, the luricine, the trush, and countless variants blurred by centuries of oral retelling. The cluricaun, often mistaken for the leprechaun, spends his existence dwelling in cellars, guarding and consuming alcohol with equal fervor. He punishes waste and rudeness by souring wine or toppling barrels in disorder. Farmers who kept drink in good faith sometimes found it untouched for years, as if blessed by unseen care, but offend him and the night turned ruinous, kegs split, animals startled, and shame resting heavy by dawn. Thus, among these solitary fae, revelry and vengeance flow from the same cup. Though many solitary fairies can seem whimsical, their psychological weight runs deep. They embody independence twisted by loneliness, wisdom hardened into sarcasm. The collective humor that defines them serves a vital Celtic function, diffusing dread through laughter, masking survival truths within absurdity. The Far Darrig's jests, while cruel, challenge obsession with mortality. The leprechaun's riddles expose greed's banality. The cluricaun's drunken merriment punishes excess. Each, in essence, upholds moral balance by breaking it. To meet them unwarily was to be schooled by chaos disguised as jest. Some legends describe these beings gathering briefly on Samhain when all worlds overlap. Then, for one night, the solitary fae abandon their isolation and hold macabre feasts in forgotten ruins. Laughter echoes from barns long unused, light glimmers from under old oak roots. Mortals who stumble upon these gatherings risk madness, For the humour of such spirits carries weight no living mind can endure. Yet folklore holds that anyone daring enough to share their wine respectfully, without greed or mockery, earns a single boon: good fortune, long life, or immunity from mischief for a year. Those who laugh at them, however, wake blind or cursed with endless laughter that turns to screams. Within Celtic storytelling, these solitary entities reflect the boundaries between individual and community. They are the mythic distillation of those who choose to stand apart. In a culture deeply rooted in kinship, such separation sparks unease. But more than warnings, these stories acknowledge autonomy's double edge. Freedom without fellowship breeds eccentricity, even madness, yet remains alluring. The Far Darrig may terrify, but he answers to none. The leprechaun may mock mankind's greed, but he requires no one's pity. Through their independence, the solitary fae mock both human pride and fear of loneliness. Their endurance through centuries owes to their adaptability. As Irish folklore evolved under Christian and then modern influence, grand deities shrank into localized sprites, but the solitary fae resisted extinction. They became symbols of cultural resilience, small, stubborn survivors of enchantment living unnoticed beside ordinary lives. Even now, in Ireland's countryside, certain hollow trees or crumbling cottages are said to belong to them, guarded in silence by tradition. Locals will not move these relics, not from fear, but from respect. Some boundaries, after all, need no proof to remain sacred. The humour they embody also holds a philosophy of endurance. For the Celts, laughter was never trivial. It was weapon, shield, and ceremony. A means to confront life's hardships without surrendering dignity. The solitary fae, through ridicule and cunning, demonstrate that laughter itself is magic, a charm against despair as potent as any spell. To laugh at death, greed, or solitude is to strip them of dominion. Thus, though small in stature, these beings guard one of the oldest spiritual truths. Power lies not in grandeur, but in defiance. In art and literature, the image of the leprechaun persisted, not because of his gold, but because of his smile. The knowing grin of a creature who understands the futility of human ambition. The Far Darrig lingers in ghostly tales for the same reason. His laughter unsettles because it confronts what humanity fears most: insignificance. Each tale, where a mortal chases a leprechaun into bog or faces the Far Darrig's mockery, ends with humility restored. The lesson hums beneath their tricks. No matter how civilized humanity grows, it remains part of a vast, indifferent wonder. As twilight deepens over an Irish field, one might still imagine the solitary fae moving unseen between worlds, hammer tapping, laughter fading, wine spilling into silence. If a sudden chill passes by, or a sound of feet echoes where no one walks, it may be their jest, a reminder not to take the world so solemnly. Offer a smile, perhaps a whispered apology if you mocked too boldly, and move on. For the solitary fae, in their solitude, still keep vigil over the fragile laughter of mankind, guarding it against the abyss. And if you listen closely, you might hear them laughing back, half in mockery, half in blessing. In the shadowed corners of Celtic myth, darker than the tricksters and crueler than the spirits of mischief, dwell the creatures that embody terror itself. Their stories whisper of blood, vengeance, and hunger beyond reason. These are the legends Ireland and Britain kept half forgotten. The tales mothers once murmured only to keep children indoors at night. Among them lurk the Abhartash, the Redcaps, and the monstrous Ellen Treshend, figures at the edges of death and nightmare, remnants of a more primitive fear that civilization could never quite silence. The tale of Abhartash begins not in chaos, but with a man, a chieftain of terrible will who ruled in the north of Ireland. He was small in stature, yet vast in cruelty, a sorcerer and tyrant feared by those who obeyed him. When his reign ended through murder or rebellion, his people hoped the earth itself might swallow his memory. But death, to Abhartash, was only inconvenience. He rose from his grave thirsting for blood, stalking the living in moonlight, demanding that his subjects fill his chalice each night with their very essence. So emerged the blood drinker, the walking corpse, centuries before such horror took root elsewhere in Europe. Local heroes sought to kill him repeatedly, but the outcome never changed. Each burial failed. Whether pierced, burned, or buried in lead, the Abhartash clawed his way free, driven not by vengeance but hunger. At last, legend says, a druid revealed the truth. The creature could not be destroyed, only bound. His killer, variously named Cathane or Catha, forced him into the ground a final time beneath heavy stone, staking his corpse with yew wood and burying him upside down. Over the grave, thorns were planted so that earth and root would trap him for eternity. Even so, villagers avoided that ground, for they swore the stones still pulsed at night, breathing softly like a heart embedded in soil. The story of Abhartash represents more than primitive vampirism. It captures an ancient tension between power and mortality, between kingship and corruption. He is not a foreign monster, but the reflection of tyranny itself, the ruler too cruel to die, feeding eternally upon those he once controlled. Through him, the Celts externalized the idea that certain evils cannot perish. They must be imprisoned beneath vigilance and ritual, forever resisting resurrection. Each retelling preserves that morale. Some hungers once awakened belong only in darkness. Far to the east, in the borderlands between England and Scotland, another darker myth took root, the Redcaps. Unlike the solitary Abhartash, these are legion, haunting old fortresses, ruins, and places soaked in remembered blood. They are goblin-like creatures, small but deadly, each clad in iron boots and carrying a pike or skinning knife. Their most chilling feature lies in their name. The red caps they wear are dyed with the blood of their victims. To forget to refresh the colour is to fade and die, so they kill not out of pleasure, but necessity. Their cruelty, therefore, sustains them. Horror becomes habit, and violence, survival. These grim spirits are said to haunt castles long abandoned after massacres, feeding on ghostly residue as much as fresh human life. Travellers who wander near their lairs report the sound of boots striking stone, slow, deliberate steps, echoing through corridors long devoid of warmth. Unlike other supernatural beings, redcaps cannot be reasoned with or driven off by faith alone. Only an iron cross or scripture read aloud can repel them, forcing them into retreat. Even then, they vanish only temporarily, leaving behind the stench of iron and rust. In them, the Celts crystallized collective memory of conquest and slaughter. The ghosts of war turned corporeal so that history's violence would never be forgotten. What gives the redcaps their lasting terror is the fusion of the mundane and the monstrous. Their iron shoes, their tools, their routine all mirror human life. They are not ethereal, they are practical, methodical, efficient. In them, the line between man and monster dissolves completely. Where the Abhartash drinks life to preserve unnatural rule, the redcap stains himself simply to endure. Both reveal a single truth about survival, that to live endlessly on blood, whether symbolic or real, is to become something less than life altogether. From Ireland's cryptic hills and Scotland's castles, we move to mythic abstraction, the monstrous Ellen Treshend, the three-headed terror of Connaught. Unlike the redcaps or the Abhartash, no single story defines its form. Some describe it as dragon, others as bird or beast of smoke and flame. What remains constant is its triune, 3 ravenous heads on one immense body, and its path of destruction across the land. According to the old texts, Ellen Treshend emerged from the cave of Cruachan, an entrance to the otherworld guarded by death itself. When it rose, fire followed, and whole regions vanished into ash. In Irish mythic cycles, the Ellen Treshend's rampage marks a turning point of cosmic balance. The creature's emergence mirrors the eruption of chaos after excess order. It was slain only by the hero Amergin, son of Exet Salach, who wielded both art and weaponry in perfect measure. The battle between them encapsulates the eternal Celtic motif. Civilization faces wildness not to triumph absolutely, but to maintain fragile equilibrium. The hero's victory does not annihilate the monster, it restores rhythm. Thus, the beast's birth and death repeat cyclically, haunting every generation as metaphor for human ambition unchecked by humility. Legends connect the Ellen Treshend to ancient rites concerning volcanoes and storms, symbols of its unpredictable ferocity. Its triple heads represent multiplicity, fire, air, and death, or perhaps the trinity of destruction, creation, and renewal. Each interpretation reinforces the Celtic belief that even calamity carries divine design. Through the Ellen Treshend's fires, fertility eventually returns to the soil. Through its roar, harmony is reborn. The horror it brings is inseparable from the world's renewal. Its myth transforms catastrophe into instrument of necessity. When examined together, these 3 beings, Abhartach, Redcap, and Ellen Treshend, form a trinity of dread. They embody 3 aspects of corruption: the immortal parasite, the mechanical killer, and the cosmic destroyer. Each reflects a different fear within the Celtic mind. The Abhartach warns against tyranny and death's defiance. The Redcap memorializes human cruelty turned instinct. The Ellen Treshend personifies the ultimate chaos that both ends and begins creation. In this layered reflection lies the genius of Celtic mythology. Every monster, however terrifying, also teaches balance. The psychological function of such myths cannot be underestimated. Communities retelling them rehearsed survival, spiritual exercises in confronting darkness without mastering it. By giving horror a name, they bound fear into shape. Through ritual, they converted memory into caution. The Abhartach's grave became a site of vigilance. The Redcap's fortress, a reminder of savagery concealed within civilization. The Ellen Treshend's cycle, a hymn to life's endurance after ruin. Myth thus served as moral architecture, containing chaos within narrative so society could persist above it. Even now, traces of these figures linger across the lands that birthed them. In Northern Ireland, travellers still speak softly near certain cairns, calling them the stones of the small king. In the borders, ruins such as Hermitage Castle bear reputations, never tamed by time. Their halls are said to echo faintly with footsteps in iron boots when storms roll in from the sea. And in the west of Ireland, the cave of Cruachan still yawns open to the public eye, a wound in the earth no age has managed to close. Standing before it, one can almost feel the pulse of stories older than stone. To encounter these legends today is to confront the primal vocabulary of fear. They ask not whether monsters exist, but whether humanity has learned from the shadows it casts. Abhartach warns that power pursued without compassion becomes eternal hunger. The Redcap shows that cruelty repeats itself until remembrance stains the world. The Ellen Treshend teaches that destruction, unacknowledged, inevitably returns. Together, they create a mirror through which the Celts glimpse their own mortality and the cycles of their age. Fear, in their mythology, is not paralysis. It is memory preserving order. So, when the night grows deep and the wind drags whispers across moor and marsh, recall the old lessons. Some spirits of ruin still walk beside us, reimagined by time, but unchanged in essence. Whether they rule in forgotten cans or flicker across modern minds, their stories persist because humanity still needs their warning. For as long as greed, cruelty, and hubris endure, the Apatach will not rest, the redcaps will not fade, and the roar of Ellen Trechen will rumble beneath the world, awaiting the next age brave or foolish enough to release it. Centuries have passed since druids tended sacred fires and kings saw omens in storms, yet Celtic mythology endures, alive and unbroken beneath the modern world's noise. Its stories whisper through ruins and rain, in songs that outlast empires and in names carved into the land itself. To walk through Ireland, Scotland, Wales, or Brittany is to step across myth disguised as soil. Even now, unseen presences seem to linger in the mists, reminding us that history can age, but meaning does not die. Every generation, whether knowingly or not, rekindles the same ancient fire that once gave birth to gods and monsters. Unlike static mythologies bound by sacred text or rigid dogma, Celtic lore never froze into completion. It survives because it transforms, absorbing, reshaping, and re-emerging in unexpected forms. The Banshee's cry echoes in modern tales of grief. The Selkies' longing reappears in stories of exile and belonging. The Dullahan's ride becomes a symbol of mortality in art and film. Each retelling is less preservation than rebirth. The myths breathe because they still find vessels in human worry, wonder, and love. They exist wherever imagination kneels to mystery. At its heart, Celtic mythology is not a gallery of dead gods, but a map of relationships between landscape and spirit, between humanity and the elements, between memory and forgetting. Rivers, hills, and islands are not backgrounds, they are sentient participants woven into the weave of the sacred. Even long after Christian scribes recorded these tales, stripping them of some of their strangeness, the soul of animism persisted. To the Celtic view, the world is not inhabited by magic, it is magic itself. Every stone still holds a pulse, every breeze a voice. It is an idea that modern societies, in their rush for mastery, have forgotten and perhaps now long to recover. What gives these myths their continued power is their refusal to divide the divine from the human. Celtic gods are flawed and emotional. Their monsters are tragic and sentient. Such fluidity mirrors our own contradictions. Where other traditions might impose order through commandments or cosmic dualism, the Celtic imagination embraces paradox. Light depends on darkness. Joy feeds upon sorrow. Death is not an end, but renewal. Thus, the ancient stories serve not as sermons, but mirrors, reflecting our in its rawest and most dignified unity. They remind us that perfection was never divine. Connection was. In the modern era, technology has replaced legend as the system explaining our world. Yet paradoxically, digital life has multiplied mythology rather than erasing it. Online, the Celtic otherworld finds new landscapes, digital communities retelling Fey folklore, writers reinterpreting ancient heroes, artists animating gods with glowing pixels. Though tools have changed, the turmoil that birthed these stories remains unchanged. We still invent monsters for our fears, heroes for our doubts, enchantments for our limitations. The medium evolves, but humanity's need to mythologize persists as instinct. Every creature explored in these chapters carries this continuity within its form. The Dullahan's silent ride teaches acceptance of death's impartial majesty. The Cailleach's reign reveals that scarcity and silence nourish renewal. The Púca and the changeling unveil how uncertainty guards the sacred. Each myth was once a spiritual manual, disguised as story, a coded dialogue between human instinct and natural law. When retold today, these narratives still instruct, offering spiritual literacy in a secular tongue. They tell us how to endure change without forfeiting awe. Environmental awareness has given these stories renewed relevance. In the age of climate change, the Celtic worldview, which perceives land and life as one vast consciousness, feels prophetic. The Tuatha Dé Danann and the Aos Sí symbolize what happens when humanity ignores reciprocity with the earth. Their withdrawal into mounds and waters mirrors our own estrangement from the planet we exploit. The myths remind us that does not forgive neglect. It merely transforms neglect into consequence. In honoring the old spirits, we honor survival itself, the recognition that belonging is responsibility, not privilege. The endurance of the Celtic mythological landscape also lies in its sound, its music, its rhythm. Ballads of Selkies, dirges for lost warriors, laments for love betrayed. These carry fragments of oral memory that history could not extinguish. Each note bridges millennia, transforming language into ritual. Even modern Celtic music, with electric instruments and digital reverberation, holds that same pulse, the heartbeat of earth echoing through human breath. Myth lives wherever song turns silence into reverence. In a broader sense, these legends form a psychological heritage. They grant structure to emotions that otherwise defy articulation. Sorrow becomes the Banshee's cry. Courage becomes Lugh's unerring spear. Decay becomes the Nuckelavee's relentless march. Through archetype and imagery, people learn to negotiate the invisible. Myth thus functions not as escape from reality, but as its illumination. It is a means of dialogue between the individual and the infinite, teaching through metaphor what reason can only name. Every encounter with these tales, no matter how brief, enlarges the human interior. Even regions far removed from the Celtic homelands now echo with their spirits. Fantasy literature, modern cinema, and gaming owe much to the Celtic imagination, from Tolkien's elves and Tuatha-like immortals to contemporary stories of shape-shifting and fey bargains. The fingerprints remain clear, yet to treat these as mere entertainment is to overlook their function. Beneath aesthetics lies deep memory, a longing for myth in a world of measurement. Through them, modern audiences rediscover what their ancestors never forgot, that imagination is not indulgence, but inheritance. Paradoxically, globalization has served to reunite scattered fragments of Celtic identity. The myths travel freely across oceans, retold in diaspora communities from America to Australia. Children, learning about leprechauns, hear echoes of ancient craftsmanship and cunning. Artists painting the Morrigan reinterpret feminism and fate through ancestral eyes. The legends, though ancient, evolve as cultural reflections of the people who claim them. They prove that mythology, far from extinct, moves like water, finding new containers while keeping its taste. There is something humbling about how these tales blur distinctions between history and eternity. When we read about the Morrigan circling a battlefield, we are not witnessing strange superstition, but an attempt to articulate truth, that death and destiny are partners in the same dance. When we hear of the Selkie shedding her skin, we see metaphor made flesh, the yearning to return to origins even at the cost of love. When we study the Cailleach shaping mountains with her staff, we witness humankind's attempt to translate geology into miracle. In these myths, imagination is continuity disguised as revelation. Perhaps that is why Celtic mythology does not decay with disbelief. It needs no faith to survive, only attention. The creatures and deities it houses represent states of being rather than commandments. They invite curiosity rather than obedience. As long as humanity feels awe before the wind, the ocean, or the unknown, the old stories will find in us a home. The power sustaining them is not the fear of gods, but the reverence for mystery, the willingness to listen when silence speaks. At a deeper level, these legends remind us of our responsibility as storytellers. Every retelling of the myths is an act of preservation and participation. When we recount the tale of the Dullahan or the rise of Lugh, we are not repeating history, but reawakening it. In speaking their names, we bridge millennia of continuity, proving that culture is not inherited by birth, but renewed by choice. Mythology endures only through those who dare listen long enough to hear what the wind still whispers. Yet there remains a melancholic beauty in this endurance. The Celts themselves knew that every story is both seed and epitaph, a record of survival written in metaphor. The old gods fade, the mounds sink, the voices dim, but the essence continues reshaping itself in new tellings. To cherish these myths, then, is to accept transience as sacred, to see impermanence not as loss, but as evolution. Through remembrance, death itself becomes creative. The myths do not ask us to worship. They ask us to participate in the cycle of retelling. So, if one stands at dusk on the windswept cliffs of the Atlantic and hears tides beating against rock, know that the rhythm is older than history and younger than thought. That timeless pulse is the same that guided druids, inspired bards, and frightened children into silence when the Banshee sang. It is the voice of the living tradition, neither wholly mortal nor divine, moving ceaselessly between worlds. To listen is to join an unbroken chain of wonder, and when silence follows, do not mourn it. For in that silence, the myth still breathes within you, as it always has and always will.